I am Clifton, 70 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful real estate developer, I provided them with a life of absolute privilege, yet I maintained my own discipline. I got home at 3 in the morning after my trip and found the house dark. My son was alone washing clothes by hand. "Where is your mother?" I asked. He whispered they left for vacation. Then I saw his bruises, and what I found in my wife's room was far worse than the bruises. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. The heavy oak front door of my estate opened with a soft click. I had taken an earlier flight back from a commercial zoning conference in Chicago, eager to sleep in my own bed. At 70, the airport layovers drained the energy right out of my bones, but my mind remained as sharp as the day I negotiated my first property deal. The sprawling house was pitch black. There were no porch lights left on for me. There were no hallway lamps illuminating the foyer. The utter silence felt entirely wrong. Monica, my wife of 10 years, always left the foyer chandelier burning when I traveled. I set my leather briefcase on the marble entryway table. A faint, rhythmic splashing sound echoed from the basement utility room. I walked down the carpeted stairs following the noise. A single bare bulb illuminated the concrete floor. Jaden, my 15-year-old adopted son, knelt beside a plastic basin. He was vigorously scrubbing a bedsheet by hand. The water in the basin was tinted a muddy, rust-colored brown. I stepped fully into the light. "Jaden," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm to avoid startling him. He flinched violently, knocking the basin over. The soapy, blood-stained water spilled across the gray concrete. He scrambled backward against the washing machine, pulling his oversized shirt tightly around his small frame. When he finally looked up, the harsh light revealed a swollen purple bruise blooming across his left cheekbone. A fresh cut split his lower lip. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably, "you were not supposed to be home until Friday." I knelt in the spilled water, ignoring the dampness seeping into my tailored suit trousers. I reached out and gently tilted his chin upward. The bruises were deliberate. The marks on his forearms looked exactly like defensive wounds. "Who did this to you?" I demanded. Jaden squeezed his eyes shut. Tears spilled over his battered cheek. "Tariq and Courtney did it," he choked out. "Monica let them do it. She told me I was just a charity case who needed to learn respect." My pulse hammered against my ribs with a dark and terrible rhythm. I had pulled Jaden out of the foster system 5 years ago. He was a brilliant, quiet African-American boy who just needed the stable foundation that my biological son Tariq had always taken for granted. Tariq had grown up surrounded by massive wealth, mutating into an entitled man who despised my working-class roots. Courtney, his white wife, constantly mocked my traditional values while eagerly spending my money. "Where is your mother right now?" I asked, my tone perfectly level despite the absolute fury igniting in my chest. "They left," Jaden sobbed. "They packed the luxury vehicles this afternoon. Monica said they were going to St. Bart's for a 2-week vacation to celebrate Tariq securing a new business deal. They locked the pantry doors. They told me if I told you about the bruises, they would use their lawyers to send me back to the state foster system immediately." I pulled Jaden into a firm embrace. "Nobody is sending you anywhere," I assured him. "Go upstairs and pack a small bag with your essentials. We are leaving this house tonight." I watched him hurry up the stairs. Then I walked directly to the master suite I shared with Monica. I did not yell. I did not throw things. Rage is an amateur weapon, and my meticulous nature in drafting municipal contracts translated perfectly into tactical clarity. I preferred absolute precision. Monica's walk-in closet was half empty, her expensive designer luggage conspicuously missing. I walked over to her antique vanity. She was usually highly meticulous, but the rush to catch a private charter flight had made her sloppy. A thick manila envelope rested carelessly beneath her jewelry box. I pulled the envelope free and turned on the reading lamp. The documents inside detailed a devastating, meticulously planned conspiracy. The first document was a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation bearing the signature of a doctor I had never met. The evaluation officially diagnosed me with rapid-onset dementia, claiming I was entirely unfit to manage my own affairs. The second document was a finalized petition for a legal conservatorship naming Monica and Tariq as my sole financial guardians. The third document was the one that turned my blood into ice water. It was a formal request to surrender Jaden back to state custody, citing my declining mental health and Monica's fabricated inability to manage a violent teenager. They had orchestrated the perfect legal coup. They beat my young son to ensure his silence, forged medical records to steal the real estate empire I built from nothing, and jetted off to the Caribbean using my own money to celebrate my impending demise. Tariq always believed I kept my wealth in vulnerable standard banking accounts, completely underestimating the complex corporate structures I'd implemented years ago. They assumed I would return home, find the paperwork, and panic like a confused old man. They expected me to fight them in family court where their bribed doctor would testify against me. I took out my phone and captured high-resolution photographs of every single page. I placed the envelope exactly where Monica had left it, ensuring not a single corner was out of place. I walked back downstairs. Jaden was waiting by the front door, clutching a worn backpack to his chest. I placed my hand on his shoulder and guided him out into the cool night air. "We are going to stay at a secure hotel tonight," I told him gently as I unlocked my car. "Tomorrow, we fix this permanently." I dialed the number of Gregory, my corporate attorney and fiercest ally, as I started the engine. The dashboard clock read exactly 4 in the morning. Clifton Gregory answered, his voice thick with sleep. "This better be a structural emergency at one of the commercial sites." "It is a complete demolition," I replied smoothly. "Monica and Tariq have initiated a hostile takeover of my estate using forged medical documents. They physically assaulted Jaden to keep him quiet. I need you at your office at 7 in the morning." The sleep vanished from Gregory's voice, instantly replaced by sharp professional focus. "I will have the financial auditors ready," he promised. I ended the call and drove away from the silent estate. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. The family I thought I had was dead, but the empire I built was fully awake, and I was about to teach them the true cost of their arrogance. The drive through the city was completely silent. I navigated my car into the underground parking garage of a sleek steel and glass high-rise in the financial district. This building was an unlisted corporate asset. Tariq and Monica had absolutely no idea it existed. I escorted Jaden up the private elevator to the penthouse suite. 2 armed security contractors were already waiting by the mahogany doors. I gave them strict orders that no one was to enter this floor without my direct verbal authorization. Inside the suite was expansive and warm. I settled Jaden onto a plush leather sofa and wrapped a thick blanket around his shoulders. Within 20 minutes, a trusted private physician arrived. I stood by quietly as the doctor conducted a thorough medical examination. He carefully documented every contusion on Jaden's body. He photographed the swollen purple bruise blooming across the boy's cheek and the defensive marks on his forearms. The doctor compiled a certified, legally unassailable medical report of severe physical abuse. I secured the encrypted digital file on a portable drive and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Jaden finally fell asleep in the guest bedroom, his breathing steady for the first time in days. I left one guard stationed directly outside his door. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the city skyline. My family thought they had broken my spirit, but I was wide awake. I arrived at the corporate headquarters precisely at 7 in the morning. Gregory was already pacing behind his massive glass desk. Stacks of financial ledgers and court filings covered the polished surface. He looked grim. "Clifton, we have a significant problem," he said, pointing to a freshly printed document. Tariq moved faster than we anticipated. He took that forged psychiatric evaluation directly to Judge Miller last night. Miller is notoriously corrupt and easily swayed by wealthy families looking to quiet down internal disputes. Tariq successfully filed an emergency injunction. He placed a temporary freeze on all your personal liquid accounts and your standard banking profiles. My son believed he had trapped me. He assumed that cutting off my personal cash flow would render me helpless, forcing me to surrender to his fraudulent conservatorship. Tariq had grown up surrounded by my wealth, but he had never bothered to learn how I actually built it. He viewed money as something that sat in a bank vault waiting to be spent. He did not understand the structural architecture of true corporate power. I sat down in the leather chair across from Gregory. I did not panic. I simply adjusted my suit jacket. "Let him have the personal accounts," I stated calmly. Tariq targeted the man because he is entirely blind to the corporation. He believes he has trapped a confused old man in a local family court dispute. We are not going to fight this freeze in front of a corrupt local judge. We are going to bypass the local jurisdiction entirely. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the glass desk. Tariq thinks he can starve me out. He assumes I will call him begging for access to my own money. He wants me to feel small, isolated, and terrified. But Tariq made a fatal miscalculation. He aimed for the leaves on the tree, completely ignoring the massive root system hidden deep underground. Gregory raised an eyebrow. How exactly do we bypass a direct court order freezing your assets? The local injunction applies to your primary residence and your personal holdings. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy-bound folder. Because my primary residence is not a personal asset, I explained. 10 years ago, I placed the deed to the estate inside a layered corporate trust. I wrote a hidden fail-safe clause into the foundation of that agreement. If the managing director, which is me, identifies a hostile financial threat from any family member, the trust allows for the immediate unilateral liquidation of the property to a federal commercial holding company. Gregory took the folder. His eyes darted across the dense legal jargon. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. You are going to sell your own house to yourself, he realized. Exactly, I confirmed. Execute the transfer clause right now. Sell the estate to Vanguard Commercial Holdings, a federal entity I anonymously control. Record the new deed by noon today. By transitioning the property from a private family residence into a federally protected commercial asset, the local family court order becomes completely useless. Judge Miller holds absolute zero jurisdiction over a federal commercial entity. Tariq thinks he locked me inside my own house. In reality, he just gave me the legal justification to pull the entire property right out from under his feet. Gregory began typing rapidly on his keyboard, initiating the digital transfer protocols. I will have the commercial ownership notice generated within the hour, he said. The trap was set. My son and my wife were celebrating their perceived victory in the Caribbean, spending money they thought they had secured forever. They had no idea the ground they stood on had just legally vanished. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the bustling city streets. The architecture of my revenge was perfectly sound. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sudden buzz broke the quiet hum of the corporate office. I pulled the device out and looked at the illuminated screen. It was a text message from Monica. Having a wonderful time at the yoga retreat, darling, she wrote. So peaceful here. Missing you. The retreat requires an emergency deposit for the wellness spa. Can you wire $50,000 to my account right away? Love you. The sheer audacity of her message was staggering. She was currently sitting on a luxury yacht in the Caribbean, sipping expensive champagne and actively mocking me. She sent that message assuming I was trapped in my house, heavily medicated and utterly confused by the sudden freeze on my bank accounts. She wanted to twist the knife testing to see if I was desperate enough to comply with her demands just to keep the peace. She thought she was playing a brilliant psychological game. She thought she held all the cards. I stared at the text message, my face an unreadable mask. Monica was greedy, vain, and relentlessly arrogant. She had spent the last 10 years perfecting her high society image while silently plotting my downfall. But her vanity was exactly what I needed to execute the next phase of my plan. I did not delete the message. I read it one more time and prepared to give my treacherous wife exactly what she asked for. I sat in Gregory's office, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. Monica thought she was a master manipulator. She believed she had outsmarted a man who spent 40 years anticipating the hidden motives of ruthless city contractors. I did not feel anger as I read her message. I felt the cold, clinical precision of an architect finding a fatal load-bearing flaw in a condemned building. She was demanding $50,000 for a domestic wellness spa while physically sitting in a foreign territory. I typed my response slowly to ensure every word played perfectly into her illusion. Of course, my love, I wrote. I am feeling very tired today and my memory is a bit foggy, but I will make sure the bank sends the funds to your account immediately. Please enjoy your yoga retreat and return home safely. I pressed send and set the phone face down on the glass desk. I knew exactly what she would do next. She would show the text to Tariq and Courtney, and they would laugh at the pathetic old man funding their Caribbean celebration. They were entirely oblivious to the reality that my text message was not a surrender. It was the closing of a steel trap. I looked across the desk at Gregory. His eyes were sharp and waiting for my command. Wire the $50,000 to her primary account, I instructed him. Do not use my personal funds. Route the transfer directly through Vanguard Commercial Holdings and use the federally tracked corporate line. Gregory paused for a fraction of a second before a slow smile spread across his face. He understood the lethal geometry of my plan immediately. If we use the federal corporate line, the transaction is automatically tagged with a tracking code, he explained. When she initiates the withdrawal in St. Bart's, the international banking system will flag the location mismatch. I nodded. She explicitly documented in writing that she is at a domestic retreat by requesting and accepting federal corporate funds across international borders under false pretenses. She is no longer committing simple local theft. She is committing federal wire fraud. It is a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. Gregory turned to his computer and began typing with rapid precision. The transfer was authorized and completed within 3 minutes. Monica was now officially on the radar of federal banking investigators. She thought she was draining my life savings to buy designer clothes and expensive champagne on a yacht. In reality, she had just funded her own prosecution. The bait was taken, and the hook was set perfectly. With Monica actively implicating herself overseas, it was time to address the physical reality of the estate they believed they owned. I authorized Gregory to dispatch a premier commercial logistics crew to the property. These were not standard residential movers. They were a highly efficient team, trained in rapid corporate liquidations. I drove back to the estate to supervise the extraction personally. Over the next 48 hours, the crew systematically dismantled the illusion of Monica and Tariq's elite status. They rolled up the imported Persian rugs. They unbolted the massive crystal chandeliers from the vaulted ceilings. Every piece of custom mahogany furniture and every original oil painting Monica had curated to impress her wealthy friends was meticulously cataloged, boxed, and loaded into a fleet of waiting transport trucks. They emptied her massive walk-in closets filled with designer dresses and shoes. I stood in the center of the grand foyer and watched my house become an empty shell. The silence here was no longer oppressive. It was deeply cleansing. I ordered the crew to empty the wine cellar and clear out the luxury vehicles remaining in the garage. Everything was relocated to a secure climate-controlled storage facility under the name of my new commercial holding company. By the time the logistics team swept the bare wooden floors and locked the heavy oak doors, the sprawling mansion was entirely devoid of life. When Monica, Tariq, and Courtney eventually returned from their extravagant vacation, they would not find the comfortable fortress they expected. They would step into an echoing cavern stripped of all comfort, warmth, and value. The estate was now nothing more than a sterile corporate asset waiting to be demolished. I returned to the luxury penthouse suite to check on Jaden. He was sitting at the dining table eating a warm meal and watching television. The bruises on his face were beginning to fade into a dull yellow. I placed a hand on his shoulder, reassuring him that our old life was permanently behind us. My phone vibrated with an urgent call from Gregory. "Clifton, you need to come back to the office immediately," Gregory said, his voice unusually tense. "I just received a frantic phone call from Marcus Thorne, who is Tariq's primary business partner. Tariq did not just forge medical documents to take over your personal accounts. He forged your physical signature on a corporate guarantor form 3 days ago." I felt the familiar cold calculation settle over my mind. "What did my son purchase?" I asked. "He used the deed to your primary estate as collateral to secure a $5 million commercial loan," Gregory revealed. "The funds were dispersed directly to a retail development firm. Tariq used your house to completely fund Courtney's new luxury retail boutique downtown. The sheer magnitude of Tariq's financial incompetence was staggering. He had leveraged a property he did not own to finance a vanity project for a woman who despised our family. Courtney married Tariq specifically for the family wealth, and she constantly looked down on my working-class roots while eagerly spending the money those roots produced. They thought they had secured a $5 million playground using my name. I told Gregory I would be there in 20 minutes. The demolition was about to escalate. I stepped out of the private elevator and walked straight into Gregory's office. He had the commercial loan file open on his massive glass desk. I picked up the guarantor agreement and stared at the final page. There was my signature in black ink right next to Tariq's. It was a remarkably good forgery, but it contained one fatal flaw. The document was dated and notarized on the 14th of October. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my digital calendar and travel logs. On the 14th of October, I was speaking at a municipal zoning summit in Seattle, surrounded by 300 industry professionals and city officials. I was not sitting in a local bank branch signing over the deed to my estate. I told Gregory to connect me directly to the primary fraud division of Vanguard Commercial Banking. Within 2 minutes, I was speaking to the senior director of risk management. I did not raise my voice or express outrage. I simply emailed him my flight manifests, hotel receipts, and a video of my keynote speech from that exact date and time. I explicitly informed him that the $5 million commercial loan issued to Tariq's retail development firm was secured using fraudulent collateral and a forged signature. I demanded immediate action to protect my corporate assets. The director placed me on a brief hold. When he returned, his voice was completely devoid of its usual corporate warmth. The bank was moving to neutralize the threat immediately. The mechanics of high-level commercial banking are swift and merciless when fraud is detected. The senior director informed me that the $5 million loan was officially recalled effective immediately. Tariq had assumed that corporate liability shielded him from personal consequences. He never bothered to read the aggressive cross-collateralization clauses woven into standard commercial lending agreements. Because the loan was secured through proven criminal forgery, the bank did not merely freeze the business accounts associated with Courtney's luxury boutique. They executed an automatic and devastating clawback across the board. Sitting in Gregory's office, I watched the digital ledgers light up as the banking algorithms went to work. The system aggressively swept through Tariq and Courtney's joint checking accounts, their personal savings, and their diverse investment portfolios. Every single dollar they possessed was instantly drained to zero to cover the massive unexpected deficit. The bank even seized the remaining balance of the $50,000 Monica had just fraudulently wired to herself because she was listed as a secondary guarantor on Tariq's initial business filing. The safety net they had taken for granted their entire lives evaporated in a matter of seconds. I looked at the cascading zeros on the screen and felt a deep, profound sense of justice. They had built their lavish lifestyle entirely on my back while treating my adopted son like garbage. Now they were completely financially naked. They had no cash, no credit, and absolutely no leverage left. The fortress of arrogance they constructed around themselves had been reduced to ash, and they were thousands of miles away, completely unaware of the inferno. I knew they were currently waking up in their luxury suites expecting another day of indulgence. They had no idea the financial guillotine had already dropped, severing their access to my empire permanently. 2,000 miles away in St. Bart's, the tropical sun was shining brightly over a high-end designer boutique. Gregory received a real-time notification from our banking contacts detailing exactly how the financial collapse impacted them on the ground. Courtney had walked into an exclusive luxury retailer with her usual arrogant stride, carrying an armful of imported silk dresses and diamond accessories. She confidently handed her platinum credit card to the cashier, fully expecting the seamless transaction she had enjoyed her entire adult life. The machine beeped a sharp, violent red denial. Courtney frowned and handed the cashier a second card belonging to Tariq. The machine rejected it instantly. She tried a third card and a fourth, growing increasingly frantic as the wealthy patrons around her began to whisper and stare. The cashier politely but firmly asked her to step aside. Humiliated and furious, Courtney stormed out of the boutique and immediately called Tariq, who was lounging on the deck of their chartered yacht. Tariq aggressively opened his mobile banking application, ready to transfer funds and fix the problem. Instead, he stared at a screen displaying negative balances across every single financial profile he owned. Panic set in. He tried to call his personal wealth manager, but the calls were automatically routed to the bank's fraud department. He called Monica, demanding she use the $50,000 she had just requested from me. Monica discovered her accounts were equally empty. The luxurious illusion shattered instantly. They were suddenly stranded on an expensive island with no way to pay for their chartered yacht, their premium hotel suites, or even their next meal. The profound embarrassment of being publicly destitute began to crush them. The elite society friends they were trying to impress quickly distanced themselves the moment the credit cards stopped working. They had absolutely no cash reserves, and the pristine reputation Monica valued above all else was completely destroyed in the span of a single afternoon. They were reduced to begging the hotel management just to keep their luggage from being thrown out onto the street. Desperation breeds a very specific kind of humiliation. Stripped of their financial power, the trio was forced to face immediate brutal reality. Tariq had to take Courtney's prized diamond watch, the same watch I had purchased for her previous birthday, and pawn it at a fraction of its true value at a local island jeweler. The meager cash they received was barely enough to cover the penalty fees for breaking their yacht charter and purchase 3 tickets on a cramped budget commercial flight back to the States. There were no private jets or first-class lounges waiting for them. They sat in economy-class seats, completely silent and seething with anger. They still believed they had one final winning card to play. They assumed the massive bank error was a temporary glitch caused by my deteriorating mental state. They convinced themselves that once they returned home, they could officially enact the forged medical conservatorship, commit me to a psychiatric ward, and seize total control of my real estate empire to restore their wealth. They planned to head straight from the airport to the estate with the fraudulent court papers in hand, entirely unaware that the massive, sprawling property had already legally changed hands. They thought they were coming back to conquer a helpless old man. They did not realize they were walking directly into a brick wall. The trap was fully set, and their blind arrogance was guiding them right into the center of it. The battered yellow taxi idled at the end of the long driveway, a stark contrast to the fleet of luxury vehicles Monica and Tariq usually commanded. I watched them through the high-definition security cameras installed around the perimeter of the estate. Tariq stepped out of the cramped back seat, first his linen suit severely wrinkled from the cheap commercial flight. He violently yanked Courtney's monogrammed suitcase from the trunk. Courtney followed him, looking entirely stripped of her usual arrogance, her designer sunglasses failing to hide her exhaustion. Monica emerged last, her face twisted in a perpetual scowl as she paid the driver with a handful of crumpled cash. They turned toward the entrance, fully expecting the massive wrought iron gates to swing open and welcome them back to their stolen kingdom. Instead, they were greeted by thick steel chains and heavy industrial padlocks securing the entrance. The manicured hedges had been replaced by stark, temporary metal fencing extending into the tree line. Bolted directly to the center of the iron gate was a large, unavoidable aluminum sign. It read, "Private property of Vanguard Commercial Holdings, no trespassing." The absolute confusion on their faces was a masterpiece. They stared at the sign, unable to comprehend how their sprawling residential fortress had suddenly transformed into a restricted corporate site overnight. I sat comfortably in the security control room just inside the main house, adjusting my tailored suit jacket as I watched the first stage of their reality completely collapse. Monica marched up to the stone pillar housing the electronic keypad. She aggressively punched in her master access code, a sequence she had used proudly for 10 years to grant entry to her high society friends. The machine responded with a sharp, flat, red light. She punched the numbers again, hitting the keys so hard her manicured fingernails nearly snapped. The red light flashed a second time, denying her entry to the life she thought she owned. I watched her shoulders tense as the first taste of absolute powerlessness washed over her. She slammed the palm of her hand against the stone pillar in sheer frustration. Tariq pushed his way past his mother, his face flushing with arrogant rage. He grabbed the heavy iron bars of the gate and rattled them violently, acting like a spoiled child denied his favorite toy. "Hey!" he shouted into the intercom system. "Open this gate right now! Who authorized these chains?" Two private security contractors stepped out from the shadows of the guardhouse. They wore tactical black uniforms and carried themselves with the disciplined, immovable posture of former military personnel. They did not rush. They walked calmly to the opposite side of the iron gate, looking at Tariq as if he were a minor nuisance. "I am Tariq," he barked, pointing a finger through the metal bars. "This is my family estate. You work for me. Remove these padlocks immediately, or I will have both of you fired and arrested for unlawful detainment." The head guard, a tall man with a completely stoic expression, crossed his arms over his chest. He did not flinch at the threat. "You are trespassing on a secure commercial site," the guard stated evenly. "Step away from the perimeter, or we will remove you by force." Tariq reached into his leather travel bag with trembling hands. He pulled out a thick stack of folded legal papers, the very documents he believed gave him absolute dominion over my life. He shoved the crumpled pages through the gaps in the iron gate, shaking them aggressively in the face of the security contractor. "Read the paperwork," Tariq demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of desperation and fury. "This is a durable power of attorney and a finalized conservatorship order signed by a family court judge. My father is suffering from severe dementia. He is legally incompetent and incapable of managing this property. I am his sole financial guardian. I dictate what happens to this house. Open the gate and let me inside to secure my father's assets." The head guard did not even reach for the papers. He glanced down at the forged documents and let out a short, dismissive breath. He looked back up at Tariq with eyes entirely devoid of sympathy. "I do not care what a local family court judge signed," the guard informed him coldly. This property is no longer a private residential estate. It was legally transferred and sold to Vanguard Commercial Holdings 4 days ago. It is now a federally protected commercial asset. Your family court order holds absolutely zero jurisdiction over a corporate entity. The words struck Tariq like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his hand dropping to his side as the papers fluttered onto the damp pavement. Courtney gasped, covering her mouth as the horrific realization finally sank in. They had rushed back from the Caribbean, enduring the humiliation of empty bank accounts and pawned jewelry, solely relying on the belief that they still held the keys to a multi-million-dollar empire. They believed the conservatorship was their ultimate safety net. Now standing on the wrong side of a locked gate, they realized the safety net never existed. I had completely bypassed their corrupt local judge. The legal trap they dug for me was totally useless against a federal commercial holding. Monica pressed her face against the iron bars, her eyes wide with mounting panic. She looked up the long, winding driveway toward the main house, desperately searching for any sign of her former luxurious life. The massive oak front doors of the estate suddenly unlatched. The heavy wood swung open slowly, revealing the grand foyer. I stepped out onto the expansive front porch. I did not look like a confused, heavily medicated old man suffering from rapid cognitive decline. I stood tall, my posture perfectly straight, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit. I looked down the driveway at the three of them shivering on the sidewalk, projecting nothing but absolute imposing authority. I was not alone. Gregory walked out of the house and stood firmly at my right side, holding a leather binder containing the undeniable proof of their financial destruction. On my left, 2 local police detectives stepped out into the daylight. They wore plain clothes, their silver badges prominently displayed on their belts. The sheer shock paralyzed my family. They stood frozen on the pavement, staring at the man they thought they had successfully buried. I began walking down the long driveway toward the gate, my footsteps echoing methodically against the pavement. The time for silent adjustments had ended. It was time to deliver the final reckoning. As I reached the iron gate, Monica's posture shifted entirely. The panicked, angry woman vanished, replaced instantly by the tragic, highly concerned wife she played so flawlessly for her wealthy high society friends. She gripped the cold metal bars, her eyes wide with manufactured distress, directing her attention entirely to the 2 detectives standing quietly at my side. "Officers, thank God you are here," she said, her voice dripping with sweet, patronizing sorrow. "My husband is incredibly unwell. He is suffering from severe rapid-onset dementia. We had to leave a yoga retreat early and fly back immediately just to handle this terrifying crisis. He clearly sold our family home in a state of deep mental confusion. He simply does not know what he is doing anymore." She shot me a look of fake pity before continuing her dramatic performance. "He needs immediate institutionalization for his own physical safety. We have the official court orders right here in our bags. Please, you have to help us get him safely to a psychiatric facility before he hurts himself or someone else. He is completely out of his mind." The detectives did not move an inch. They did not reach for the gate locks. They simply looked at her, then looked calmly back at me. Monica fully expected them to force the gate open and hand me over like a helpless child. She thought her pristine white sundress and her weeping wife routine would override the law. She severely underestimated the men standing beside me, and she had absolutely no idea the devastating trap she was currently standing in. I stepped directly up to the iron gate, standing mere inches away from the woman who had coldly plotted my demise. I did not shake. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a chilling, absolute clarity that shattered her illusion of control entirely. "I do not have dementia, Monica," I stated smoothly. "My mind is as sharp as the day I caught Tariq embezzling from my construction firm 3 years ago." Tariq flinched visibly, his jaw dropping. I had known about his massive financial failures for years, choosing to remain silent while I meticulously gathered undeniable evidence of his incompetence and fraud. I turned my attention to the stack of crumpled papers Tariq had dropped on the pavement. "You thought you could bribe a corrupt doctor to sign a fake evaluation?" I continued gesturing for Gregory to step forward. Gregory unlocked his leather binder and pressed a crisp, notarized document against the iron bars for them to see clearly. "This is the corporate transfer deed," I explained. "It was drafted by a team of elite corporate attorneys and witnessed by a federal magistrate. The sale of this property to Vanguard Commercial Holdings was executed with perfect legal precision. You cannot reverse it, and you cannot fight it in your corrupt local family court." Monica stared at the corporate seal on the document, her fake tears drying up instantly. The patronizing sweetness evaporated from her voice, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. She looked at the detectives, expecting them to intervene on her behalf. "This is absurd," Monica stammered, her hands gripping the bars so tightly her knuckles turned white. "He is sick. You cannot let him get away with this illegal theft." I looked her dead in the eyes. "I already got away with it, Monica. You are currently trespassing on federal commercial property. You own absolutely nothing." Tariq completely lost whatever fragile grip he still had on his temper. The sudden realization that his entire inheritance had been legally incinerated pushed him straight over the edge. He kicked the wrought iron gate with his expensive leather shoe, cursing loudly into the evening air. His face turned a deep, furious shade of red, the veins in his neck bulging prominently against his wrinkled linen collar. "You vindictive old fool," Tariq screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You think a piece of paper stops me? I have the legal conservatorship. I have the local judge's signature. I will call the state hospital right now and have a psychiatric ambulance sent to this exact address." He slammed his hands against the heavy metal bars, his eyes wild with unhinged aggression. Courtney tried to pull him back by his arm, whispering his name in a sheer panic, but Tariq shoved his wife away effortlessly. He was entirely consumed by his own arrogance, completely blind to the two plainclothes detectives silently watching his every violent move. "I will have you forcibly committed today," Tariq roared, stepping aggressively closer to the gate, shoving his arm through the iron bars, trying to grab the lapel of my tailored suit jacket. "I will lock you in a padded room for the rest of your miserable life. I will take the commercial company. I will take this house. You are nothing but a broken old man, and I am the absolute legal guardian of this estate. I am in charge now. Open this gate right now before I break it down myself." He was panting heavily, demanding obedience from a universe that no longer bent to his will. He truly believed his loud voice and his physical intimidation would force me into submission. He thought acting like a violent predator would secure his ultimate victory. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, watching him fully unravel, waiting for the exact moment the pendulum of justice would swing back and strike him down permanently. The taller of the two detectives finally moved. He stepped smoothly in front of me, intercepting Tariq's outstretched arm and pushing it firmly back through the iron gate. The detective reached to his heavy belt and pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs, the metallic clinking sound cutting sharply through Tariq's frantic shouting. Tariq froze, blinking in sudden, absolute confusion. "What are you doing?" Tariq demanded, his voice faltering. "I am the victim here. He is stealing my property. Arrest him right now." The detective did not smile. He signaled to the security guards, who quickly unlocked a small pedestrian side gate. The two detectives stepped through the opening onto the public sidewalk, flanking Tariq instantly. "We are not here to assist with a civil property dispute," the lead detective stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He grabbed Tariq by the shoulder and spun him around, slamming him forcefully against the hood of the nearby yellow taxicab. "Tariq Vance, you are under arrest for the severe physical assault and battery of a minor." Tariq let out a high-pitched gasp of pure shock as the cold steel cuffs locked tightly around his wrists. "Assault? What assault? You have no proof." I stepped up to the edge of the open gate, looking down at my biological son. "I have the certified clinical medical report," I informed him coldly. "I have the high-resolution photographs of Jaden's bruised face. I secured the forensic evidence the exact same night you beat him and fled the country." The ultimate consequence had finally arrived. I stopped 2 feet from the wrought iron gate, close enough to see the beads of sweat forming beneath Monica's heavy foundation. The moment the two detectives stepped up beside me, her posture shifted entirely. The panicked, angry woman vanished. In her place stood the tragic, deeply concerned wife she played so flawlessly at charity galas. She gripped the cold metal bars, her eyes wide with manufactured distress, directing her attention entirely to the officers. "Detectives, thank God you are here," she said. Her voice dripped with a sweet, patronizing sorrow. "My husband is incredibly unwell. He is suffering from severe, rapid-onset dementia. We had to leave our yoga retreat early and fly back immediately just to handle this terrifying crisis. He clearly sold our family home in a state of deep mental confusion. He simply does not know what he is doing anymore." She shot me a look of fake pity before continuing her dramatic performance. "He needs immediate institutionalization for his own physical safety. We have the official court orders right here in our bags. Please, you have to help us get him safely to a psychiatric facility before he hurts himself or someone else. He is completely out of his mind." The detectives did not move an inch. They did not reach for the gate locks. They simply looked at her, then looked calmly back at me. Monica fully expected them to force the gate open and hand me over like a helpless child. She thought her pristine white sundress and her weeping wife routine would override the law. She severely underestimated the men standing beside me. I did not shake. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a chilling, absolute clarity that shattered her illusion of control entirely. "I do not have dementia, Monica," I stated smoothly. "My mind is exactly as sharp as the day I caught Tariq embezzling from my commercial construction firm 3 years ago." Tariq flinched visibly, his jaw dropping open. I had known about his massive financial failures for years, choosing to remain absolutely silent while I meticulously gathered undeniable evidence of his incompetence and fraud. I turned my attention to the stack of crumpled papers Tariq had dropped on the pavement. "You thought you could bribe a corrupt local doctor to sign a fake evaluation?" I continued gesturing for Gregory to step forward. Gregory unlocked his leather binder and pressed a crisp, notarized document against the iron bars for them to read. "This is the corporate transfer deed," I explained. "It was drafted by a team of elite corporate attorneys and directly witnessed by a federal magistrate. The sale of this property to Vanguard Commercial Holdings was executed with perfect legal precision. You cannot reverse it, and you cannot fight it in your corrupt local family court." Monica stared at the corporate seal on the document, her fake tears drying up instantly. The patronizing sweetness evaporated from her voice, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. She looked at the detectives, desperately expecting them to intervene on her behalf. "This is absurd," Monica stammered, her hands gripping the bars so tightly her knuckles turned white. "He is sick. You cannot let him get away with this illegal theft." I looked her dead in the eyes. "I already got away with it, Monica. You are currently trespassing on federal commercial property. You own absolutely nothing." Tariq completely lost whatever fragile grip he still had on his temper. The sudden realization that his entire inheritance had been legally incinerated pushed him straight over the edge. He kicked the wrought iron gate with his expensive leather shoe, cursing loudly into the cool evening air. His face turned a deep, furious shade of red, the veins in his neck bulging prominently against his wrinkled linen collar. "You vindictive old fool!" Tariq screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You think a single piece of paper stops me? I have the legal conservatorship. I have the local judge's signature. I will call the state hospital right now and have a psychiatric ambulance sent to this exact address." He slammed his hands against the heavy metal bars, his eyes wild with unhinged aggression. Courtney tried to pull him back by his arm, whispering his name in sheer panic, but Tariq shoved his wife away effortlessly. He was entirely consumed by his own arrogance, completely blind to the two plainclothes detectives silently watching his every violent move. "I will have you forcibly committed today," Tariq roared, stepping aggressively closer to the gate. He shoved his arm through the iron bars, desperately trying to grab the lapel of my tailored suit jacket. "I will lock you in a padded room for the rest of your miserable life. I will take the commercial company. I will take this house. You are nothing but a broken old man, and I am the absolute legal guardian of this estate. I am in charge now. Open this gate right now before I break it down myself." He was panting heavily, demanding obedience from a universe that no longer bent to his will. He truly believed his loud voice and his physical intimidation would force me into submission. He thought acting like a violent predator would secure his ultimate victory. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, watching him fully unravel, waiting for the exact moment the pendulum of justice would swing back and strike him down permanently. The taller of the two detectives finally moved. He stepped smoothly in front of me, intercepting Tariq's outstretched arm and pushing it firmly back through the iron gate. The detective reached to his heavy belt and pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs. The metallic clinking sound cut sharply through Tariq's frantic shouting. Tariq froze, blinking in sudden, absolute confusion. "What are you doing?" Tariq demanded, his voice faltering. "I am the victim here. He is stealing my property. Arrest him right now." The detective did not smile. He signaled to the security guards, who quickly unlocked a small pedestrian side gate. The two detectives stepped through the opening onto the public sidewalk, flanking Tariq instantly. "We are not here to assist with the civil property dispute," the lead detective stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He grabbed Tariq by the shoulder and spun him around, slamming him forcefully against the hood of the nearby yellow taxicab. "Tariq, you are under arrest for the severe physical assault and battery of a minor." Tariq let out a high-pitched gasp of pure shock as the cold steel cuffs locked tightly around his wrists. "Assault! What assault? You have no proof." I stepped up to the edge of the open gate, looking down at my biological son. "I have the certified clinical medical report," I informed him coldly. "I have the high-resolution photographs of Jaden's bruised face. I secured the forensic evidence the exact same night you beat him and fled the country." The ultimate consequence had finally arrived. Monica fled the iron gates of the estate in a generic rideshare vehicle, leaving her biological son and daughter-in-law to face the police completely alone. She did not shed a single tear for Tariq as the car sped toward the financial district of the city. Her survival instinct had always overridden any maternal affection she claimed to possess. She directed the driver to drop her off in front of a highly exclusive private wealth management firm. This bank catered only to elite clients requiring absolute discretion and offshore routing. For the past 5 years, Monica had been meticulously siphoning capital from my commercial construction business. She buried the stolen funds in a hidden international account designed specifically to fund her escape if her grand conspiracy ever unraveled. She smoothed the wrinkles from her white sundress and marched through the polished glass doors with her head held high. She bypassed the standard reception desk and demanded an immediate audience with her dedicated portfolio manager. Sitting in the sterile luxury of his private office, Monica ordered the banker to liquidate her entire offshore escape fund immediately. She instructed him to wire the accumulated millions directly into an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet so she could board a commercial flight out of the country by midnight. She sat back in the leather chair, taking a deep breath of relief. She truly believed she had successfully outsmarted me and secured her luxurious future. The private banker, a meticulously groomed man in a sharp navy suit, did not immediately respond to her urgent commands. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and stared intently at his computer monitor. His fingers moved rhythmically across the keyboard, the sharp clacking sound echoing in the otherwise silent office. Monica tapped her designer heel against the marble floor, her impatience growing by the second. She demanded to know why the transfer was taking so long, threatening to pull her portfolio and ruin his career if he did not expedite the transaction. The banker remained completely stoic. He pressed a final button on his keyboard and waited for the laser printer on his desk to hum to life. A single crisp sheet of paper emerged from the tray. He picked it up briefly, reviewed the printed text, and slid it across the polished mahogany desk toward Monica. He did not offer any apologies or explanations. He simply folded his hands together and watched her. Monica snatched the paper, her eyes darting aggressively to the bottom line where her multi-million-dollar safety net was supposed to be displayed. The color drained entirely from her face. She blinked rapidly, bringing the paper closer to her eyes as if the ink were playing a cruel trick on her vision. The available balance on her hidden offshore account was exactly 0. The account had not been frozen or suspended. It had been completely and legally drained. She slammed the paper down on the desk, her voice rising to a shrill, frantic pitch. She accused the bank of gross incompetence, screaming that millions of dollars do not simply vanish into thin air. She demanded he call the central routing office and fix the system glitch immediately. The banker simply shook his head, informing her that there was no glitch. The heavy oak door to the private office swung open before Monica could continue her screaming fit. I walked into the room, followed closely by Gregory, who held his familiar leather binder tucked under his arm. Monica froze in her chair, her breath catching in her throat as she looked from me to the banker, the devastating reality finally clicking into place. I stepped forward and looked down at the woman who had spent a decade plotting my demise. "Money never just vanishes, Monica," I stated in a calm, measured tone. "It simply returns to its rightful owner." I pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "You thought you were incredibly clever funneling capital out of my construction firm by overpaying shell vendors for non-existent building materials. You siphoned off small, manageable amounts every week for 5 years, assuming a man running $1 billion empire would never notice a few missing bricks. But I am an architect. I notice every single fracture in a foundation. I tracked your embezzlement from the very first fraudulent invoice. I let you build that offshore account because I knew exactly how to dismantle it." Gregory stepped forward and placed a highlighted legal document directly on top of her zero-balance receipt. It was a copy of the ironclad prenuptial agreement she had eagerly signed 10 years ago. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Gregory recited flawlessly. The embezzlement recovery clause. It explicitly states that any funds unlawfully diverted from Clifton's corporate entities by a spouse can be legally reclaimed without prior notice, including absolute access to any accounts where said funds are deposited. Because you used stolen corporate money to seed this offshore account, you legally granted me full authorization to sweep the entire balance. I executed the clawback yesterday afternoon while you were busy drinking champagne on a yacht. You have no escape fund. You have no leverage. You are completely broke and you are entirely alone. Monica stared at the prenuptial agreement, her hands shaking violently as her entire world collapsed around her. She had abandoned her son to the police to save herself, only to discover she had run straight into a dead end. She realized she could not charm or manipulate her way out of this room. The financial blockade was absolute. She stood up abruptly, knocking her leather chair backward. She did not say a word to me. She stormed out of the private banking office, her designer heels echoing frantically down the marble hallway as she fled into the bustling city streets. But Monica was a creature of pure survival and deeply ingrained narcissism. Deprived of her hidden wealth and her grand estate, she immediately pivoted to the only weapon she had left: public manipulation. Within 2 hours of leaving the bank, she contacted the most aggressive, media-hungry family law attorney in the city. She filed an emergency, heavily publicized divorce petition against me. In the filings, she boldly demanded half of my entire net worth and absolute alimony. To ensure the media picked up the story immediately, she explicitly and falsely accused me of severe, prolonged domestic abuse. She claimed she had to flee the estate in terror, painting herself as a battered wife escaping a tyrannical billionaire. She wanted to destroy my reputation in the court of public opinion, hoping the sheer scandal would force me to settle financially out of court. The fallout from Monica fleeing the private bank was instantaneous. She knew she had absolutely no money left in her hidden accounts, so she immediately weaponized the only currency she still possessed, which was public sympathy. By noon the next day, every major local news network had picked up the story of our high-profile divorce. Monica sat in a brightly lit television studio wearing a modest, uncharacteristically cheap gray sweater. She deliberately wiped away non-existent tears as the anchor asked her about our sudden separation. She looked directly into the camera and painted a horrifying picture of a tyrannical real estate developer who ruled his household with an iron fist. She claimed she had to flee the estate in the middle of the night because I had become violently unpredictable and deeply abusive. She painted Tariq and Courtney as innocent victims caught in the crossfire of my sudden, terrifying mental breakdown. She begged the viewing public to understand her plight, demanding half of my net worth not out of greed but as necessary compensation for a decade of alleged severe domestic trauma. She wanted to destroy my pristine business reputation. She thought the sheer weight of a massive public scandal would force me into a quiet, heavily funded settlement just to make the negative headlines disappear. She truly believed I was a private man who would pay any price to avoid being dragged through the mud on television. Monica was entirely correct about one thing. I have always hated the public spotlight. I spent my entire career building my commercial zoning empire, quietly letting my architectural achievements speak for themselves while I remained securely in the background. But she severely underestimated my willingness to step into the mud if it meant burying her permanently. I sat in the secure penthouse suite watching her televised performance with Gregory. I did not feel the urge to call the news station and angrily defend myself. I knew that engaging in a public screaming match would only validate her false narrative. Instead, I decided to utilize her obsessive narcissism directly against her. I turned to Gregory and told him to file the official response immediately. We did not issue a polite press release or a standard legal denial to the media. Gregory marched directly to the downtown courthouse and filed a brutal, highly public subpoena that instantly became part of the open public record. The filing did not merely deny her baseless allegations of domestic abuse. It aggressively challenged her entire legal standing to file the divorce petition in the first place. We demanded an emergency hearing to address severe criminal misconduct surrounding the dissolution of the marriage. The media outlets that had eagerly broadcast Monica shedding fake tears suddenly had a massive new legal document to dissect on the evening news. Our public filing explicitly stated that Monica was actively fleeing a federal wire fraud investigation and attempting to use the family court system as a shield to extort capital she no longer possessed. We completely turned her calculated media campaign into a giant spotlight illuminating her own criminality. The emergency family court hearing took place less than 48 hours later. The courtroom was packed with hungry reporters hoping to witness a billionaire take a messy public fall. Monica sat at the petitioner table looking smug and fully prepared to continue her battered wife routine for the cameras. She assumed family court would be a sympathetic venue, where emotional tears carried far more weight than cold facts. Gregory stood up and approached the judge's bench with quiet confidence. He did not address the vast divorce assets or the ridiculous alimony demands. He immediately invoked the legal doctrine of unclean hands. He explained to the judge that a party cannot seek equitable relief or financial compensation from a court if they have acted unethically or illegally in relation to the subject of the lawsuit. Gregory then opened his heavy leather binder and submitted the highest-grade photographic evidence of the comprehensive psychiatric evaluation I had found hidden in Monica's closet. He presented the forged medical records diagnosing me with rapid-onset dementia alongside the drafted conservatorship petition. He laid out the timeline perfectly, showing the judge exactly how Monica and Tariq had meticulously planned to declare me legally incompetent to seize my entire empire and send my adopted son back to foster care. Gregory argued with absolute conviction that Monica's divorce petition was not a legitimate request to end a broken marriage. It was simply the desperate backup plan to a failed criminal conspiracy. He submitted the forged Alzheimer's diagnosis as definitive, undeniable proof that Monica's entire presence in the courtroom was a continuous malicious fraud designed strictly to extort money. The judge carefully inspected the photographs of the forged medical documents, his expression hardening into severe displeasure. He looked down at Monica, who had suddenly lost all her rehearsed composure. The media reporters in the gallery frantically took notes as the narrative flipped entirely. Monica was no longer the tragic victim escaping an abusive husband. She was a documented predator who had been caught red-handed trying to steal an empire using falsified medical records. Monica stared at her defense attorney, sheer panic radiating from her eyes as the judge openly questioned the validity of her entire divorce petition. She realized with terrifying clarity that she was actively losing the legal battle on a highly public stage. The court was on the verge of throwing out her case entirely, leaving her with absolutely nothing but mounting criminal charges. But Monica was a creature of desperate survival, and she always kept a final trick hidden up her sleeve. She leaned over and frantically whispered into her lawyer's ear, pulling a folded document from her designer handbag. Her attorney stood up looking visibly hesitant and approached the bench. He submitted a newly discovered document to the court for immediate review. It was a formal amendment to our original prenuptial agreement. I stared at the paper as Gregory handed me a digital copy to review. The amendment contained a specific, highly unusual clause guaranteeing Monica a mandatory minimum payout of $10 million in the event of a divorce, completely voiding any other financial penalties or fraud contingencies. The document was dated 3 years ago. It bore my exact signature, and more importantly, it was officially stamped and signed by a state-certified public notary. Monica looked back at me from across the courtroom, a venomous, triumphant smile returning to her face. She had pulled a $10 million safety net out of thin air, leaning on the absolute legal weight of a certified notary stamp to bypass my entire unclean hands defense. She thought she had found the perfect unbreakable loophole to guarantee her wealthy future regardless of her crimes. We sat in the quiet sanctuary of Gregory's office, the glowing screens of his monitors providing the only light in the room. The physical copy of the backdated prenuptial amendment sat on the glass desk between us like a venomous snake. Monica was attempting to use a $10 million parachute to float safely away from the wreckage of her own crimes. The document bore my exact signature, meticulously replicated down to the slight hesitation in the loop of the letter C. More importantly, it carried the raised seal of a state-certified public notary. Gregory rubbed his temples, warning me that family courts moved at a glacial pace when it came to authenticating historical documents. He said a judge might freeze my assets for years while handwriting experts argued over ink degradation and paper age. I told him we were not going to wait for the family court system to do its job. We were going to bypass the sluggish bureaucracy entirely. I did not build a billion-dollar commercial real estate empire by waiting for a judge's permission to find the truth. I instructed Gregory to hire the most aggressive private intelligence firm on our corporate payroll. I wanted every detail of that specific notary stamp traced back to its absolute origin. We needed to find the hand that pressed that seal onto the paper, and we needed to find it before Monica could leverage the document to manipulate the press any further. The private investigators worked with terrifying efficiency. Money opens doors that the law must knock politely to enter. Within 48 hours, they handed Gregory a comprehensive encrypted dossier. The notary stamp on Monica's golden ticket was technically real, but the notary who originally owned it had been disbarred and incarcerated 3 years ago for real estate fraud. The physical stamp itself had vanished from the state evidence locker during his trial. The investigators traced the shadow economy of the city's financial district following a trail of hushed cash transactions directly back to Tariq. My biological son had always relied on paying his way out of trouble, a toxic habit he inherited directly from his mother. Whenever one of Tariq's vanity business projects was on the verge of bankruptcy, miraculously perfect accounting ledgers would suddenly appear to satisfy the auditors. Tariq did not have the discipline to fix his own mistakes, but he always knew exactly who to pay to make them disappear. The trail led us to an underground document forger operating out of a crumbling industrial park on the outskirts of the city. The man was a ghost in the system, a disgraced former corporate accountant who made a highly lucrative living washing the dirty laundry of arrogant trust fund children. Tariq had been a regular client for years. He had used this man to cover up his past business failures, and now he had used him to manufacture the fraudulent medical records and the prenuptial amendment. I did not send the police to the industrial park. A man backed into a corner by law enforcement will lie to protect himself, but a man presented with a golden exit strategy will sell out his clients immediately. I drove to the dingy downtown office myself, leaving my private security detail waiting by the car. The stairwell smelled of stale tobacco and damp concrete. I pushed open the heavy steel door to Unit 4 without knocking. The forger was a thin, nervous man sitting behind a bank of high-resolution monitors and industrial printers. He jumped up, reaching for a drawer, but he froze the moment he recognized my face. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew he had forged documents designed to steal my life. He expected me to threaten him with physical violence or immediate arrest. Instead, I calmly pulled out the velvet chair across from his desk and sat down. I placed a sleek black folder on his workstation. I told him I admired his craftsmanship, noting that replicating my signature required a rare level of structural precision. I did not raise my voice. I simply offered him a choice. He could face federal charges for conspiracy wire fraud and the attempted extortion of $10 million, spending the rest of his life in a concrete cell. Or he could open the black folder. Inside was a highly lucrative, legitimate employment contract for a specialized corporate auditing position at one of my international subsidiaries in Geneva. It included full relocation expenses, absolute legal protection, and a 6-figure salary. The only condition was that he had to turn state's witness. He had to testify perfectly and publicly against Monica and Tariq, handing over every piece of unassailable proof he possessed. The forger looked at the employment contract, his hands shaking slightly as he read the generous compensation package. He was a criminal born out of necessity, surviving in the shadows, constantly looking over his shoulder for the authorities or angry clients. I was offering him a permanent, legitimate escape hatch. He did not hesitate for more than 10 seconds. He eagerly reached across the desk, took my custom pen, and signed the employment agreement. He then stood up, walked over to a rusted filing cabinet, and pulled away a false back panel to reveal a hidden biometric safe. He punched in a code and extracted a solid-state digital drive, placing it directly into my hands. He explained that a man in his profession never does business with a wealthy, entitled client without securing an insurance policy. He had hidden cameras recording every single transaction in his office. The drive contained raw, unedited, high-definition security video footage. It clearly showed Tariq walking into this exact room, placing thick stacks of $100 bills on the desk, and explicitly ordering the fabrication of my Alzheimer's diagnosis. A second video clip showed Tariq paying him a massive cash bonus to backdate the $10 million prenuptial amendment for Monica. I watched the footage on his monitor, seeing my son laughing as he bought the documents meant to destroy me. The final nail in their coffin was officially secured, and their entire legal defense was about to be burned to the ground. Gregory and I watched the legal system process Tariq from the comfort of my boardroom. Despite the massive severity of his felony charges, Tariq managed to secure a temporary release. He did not use standard bail bondsmen. They all required physical collateral he no longer possessed. Instead, Tariq turned to a highly dangerous local loan shark, borrowing heavily against a non-existent future just to walk out of the county jail. He was desperate to breathe fresh air, genuinely believing his expensive defense attorney could still fabricate a legal miracle. That arrogant illusion shattered the exact moment he stepped into his lawyer's downtown office. Gregory had already expedited the delivery of the digital evidence directly to the district attorney. During the initial discovery meeting, the prosecutor handed Tariq's lawyer a tablet. Tariq sat in the stiff leather chair and watched the unedited security footage of himself standing in the crumbling industrial park. He watched his own face light up with arrogant laughter as he handed thick stacks of cash to the underground forger. He watched himself explicitly order the fabrication of my dementia diagnosis and the backdated prenuptial amendment. The color drained entirely from his face. His defense attorney closed the tablet and frankly informed Tariq that a plea deal was his only remaining option. The attorney stated clearly that going to trial with high-definition video evidence of federal forgery and bribery would guarantee a maximum sentence. Tariq realized his money could not buy his way out of this trap. Facing a mandatory federal prison sentence completely broke whatever fragile resolve Tariq had left. He had spent his entire life insulated by my wealth, constantly shielded from the harsh consequences of his own reckless actions. He had never faced true adversity. When confronted with the terrifying reality of a concrete cell and a stripped existence, his fundamental cowardice took absolute control. Tariq did not consider fighting the charges in court. He did not consider accepting a plea deal to reduce his sentence. He certainly did not consider the devastating legal peril hanging over the heads of his mother and his wife, both of whom were severely implicated in his schemes. He decided to flee the country entirely, ignoring his upcoming court dates, his binding legal obligations, and the highly violent loan shark who now held his massive bail debt. He returned to the cheap, dimly lit roadside motel where he and Courtney were temporarily staying after being legally evicted from the estate. Courtney was currently out meeting with her own frantic legal counsel, leaving Tariq entirely alone in the room to execute his desperate exit strategy. He pulled his leather suitcase onto the unmade bed and began packing only his most essential designer clothing, discarding anything that would weigh him down. He knew his passport was still active and valid, but he also knew a commercial flight would leave an undeniable digital trail straight to his final destination. He needed a completely untraceable exit. He needed to charter a private jet that would bypass standard international customs protocols, a rare luxury that required an exorbitant amount of upfront cash. Since the bank had clawed back every single dollar from his business and personal accounts to cover the fraudulent commercial loan, his wallet was effectively empty. But Tariq had always been a master at stealing from the people closest to him. Tariq walked over to Courtney's battered travel bags tucked in the corner of the dim motel room. When the federal bailiff seized the inventory of her luxury boutique, Courtney managed to salvage her personal high-end jewelry collection. She hid the velvet boxes at the bottom of her luggage, intending to use the diamond necklaces and platinum bracelets to pay for her own criminal defense retainer. Tariq did not hesitate for a single second. He unzipped her bags and ruthlessly emptied every velvet box. He stuffed the diamonds, the imported pearls, and the heavy gold bracelets deep into his own pockets. He walked down to a high-risk pawnbroker in the Diamond District, a place known for asking zero questions and paying strictly in untraceable cash. He liquidated his wife's entire financial safety net for a tiny fraction of its true value, walking out with a heavy duffel bag full of crisp bills. Tariq immediately contacted a shady aviation broker who specialized in discreet international transportation. He used the stolen cash to charter a small private jet scheduled to depart from a remote airstrip just outside the city limits. His destination was a non-extradition country in South America, where he planned to disappear entirely. He did not buy a second ticket for Courtney. He did not leave a note explaining his sudden departure. He actively planned to leave his wife behind to face the crushing weight of the federal fallout completely alone. He knew the authorities would interrogate her relentlessly, and he knew the ruthless loan shark would hunt her down looking for the massive bail debt. He simply did not care. His survival was the only metric that mattered. He grabbed his duffel bag, called an anonymous rideshare vehicle, and headed toward the airstrip under the cover of darkness, supremely confident he had finally outsmarted the system and secured his freedom. 2 hours later, Courtney returned to the silent motel room. She was utterly exhausted from her brutal meeting with the public defender. She sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and reached for her travel bag, desperate to retrieve a diamond necklace to cover her immediate legal fees. She unzipped the hidden compartment and pulled out the velvet boxes. She opened the first box. It was completely empty. Her breath caught in her throat. She frantically opened the second, the third, and the fourth. Every single piece of her luxury jewelry was gone. She tore through the rest of the luggage, tossing clothes across the room in a blind panic. Beneath a stack of Tariq's discarded shirts, her hand brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. She pulled it out and smoothed the edges. It was a digital printout of an aviation charter receipt. The document detailed a one-way solo flight to South America paid in full with cash scheduled to depart that very night. Courtney stared at the single passenger name printed on the manifest. Tariq. The terrifying reality of her situation crashed down on her like a concrete block. She dropped the receipt onto the cheap carpet. Her husband had deliberately stolen her last remaining lifeline. He was explicitly abandoning her to take the ultimate fall for the fraudulent commercial loan and the federal conspiracy. She was entirely alone, completely destitute, and facing imminent prison time. The night air was thick and humid as my town car idled at the edge of the private airstrip just outside the city limits. Gregory sat beside me, his tablet illuminating his calm expression. We watched the desolate tarmac through the tinted windows. Right on schedule, a generic rideshare vehicle pulled up to the chain-link fence. Tariq stepped out into the shadows. He wore a dark hoodie pulled up over a baseball cap, a pathetic attempt to disguise himself from a world he believed was actively hunting him. He dragged a heavy duffel bag out of the trunk. I knew exactly what was inside that bag. It was the liquidated cash from his wife's stolen jewelry collection. He walked briskly toward the small twin-engine private jet idling on the runway. The pilot stood by the folding steps checking his watch. Tariq handed over the heavy bag with a smug, arrogant nod. He truly believed he had beaten the system. He thought he was outsmarting the federal government, the local loan sharks, and most importantly, me. He looked around the empty airfield, a confident smirk spreading across his face. He was convinced that his inherited wealth and his unearned privilege had finally bought his permanent freedom. He had absolutely no idea that I had engineered this exact scenario. I wanted him to feel the absolute certainty of escape right before I ripped it away forever. Tariq reached for this handrail. As he placed his expensive leather sneaker onto the first metal step of the aircraft, the darkness of the airstrip shattered. 4 unmarked black SUVs breached the perimeter simultaneously. Their engines roared as they accelerated across the tarmac, executing a flawless tactical maneuver to box in the private jet. Blinding white spotlights flared to life, pinning Tariq against the fuselage like an insect trapped under a magnifying glass. The doors of the SUVs flew open before the vehicles even came to a complete stop. A dozen federal agents swarmed the aircraft. They wore heavy tactical gear with the letters FBI emblazoned in stark yellow across their chests. Weapons were drawn and leveled directly at the steps. "Federal agents, drop the bag and put your hands on your head," the lead agent roared through a megaphone. Tariq froze. The smug, arrogant smirk dissolved, instantly replaced by sheer, unfiltered terror. He dropped the duffel bag. It hit the tarmac with a heavy thud, spilling bundles of stolen cash onto the oil-stained concrete. He slowly raised his trembling hands, squinting against the blinding spotlights. "Do not move," the lead agent commanded, closing the distance rapidly. "Turn around and face the aircraft." Tariq obeyed blindly. His knees shook so violently I could see his legs buckling from 50 yards away. The pilot immediately stepped back, raising his own hands and loudly declaring he was just a hired contractor with no knowledge of his passenger's legal status. The sheer magnitude of the federal response entirely crushed Tariq's spirit. He was no longer a wealthy socialite negotiating a business deal. He was a cornered fugitive facing the absolute unyielding force of the United States government. 2 agents moved in and grabbed Tariq by his arms. They shoved him roughly against the side of the private jet. The sound of steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists echoed across the quiet airfield. I watched the scene unfold with absolute cold satisfaction. I had anticipated my biological son's fundamental cowardice perfectly. Tariq lacked the discipline to stand trial and the courage to face his own actions. I knew he would try to run the moment the pressure became unbearable. That is why, on the exact day I reported Monica's fraudulent $50,000 wire transfer, I instructed Gregory to alert the federal authorities to Tariq's potential flight risk. The federal prosecutor immediately placed a highly classified tracking hold on his passport and monitored his financial networks for sudden cash liquidations. Tariq thought he was operating in secret by using an underground aviation broker. He did not realize the broker was legally obligated to cross-reference passenger manifests against federal watch lists. The government knew about this flight before Tariq even packed his bags. We simply waited for him to cross the line from a civil defendant out on bail to an active federal fugitive attempting to flee jurisdiction. The lead agent read Tariq his rights, his voice carrying over the whining jet engines. Tariq Vance, you are under arrest for violating the explicit conditions of your bond, attempting to flee federal prosecution, and wire fraud. Your bail is permanently revoked. Tariq began to weep. The sound of his pathetic sobbing drifted across the tarmac. He pleaded with the agents, claiming there had been a massive misunderstanding, begging them to let him call his lawyer. The agents ignored his frantic cries completely. They dragged him away from the steps of the plane, his expensive sneakers dragging uselessly against the concrete. They marched him toward a heavily armored transport vehicle waiting at the edge of the runway. His grand escape to South America had ended before he even boarded the plane. He was going straight to a federal holding cell, and this time, no amount of money or manipulation would open the door. Just as the agents shoved Tariq into the back of the transport vehicle, another car pulled up to the security gate. A beat-up taxi idled, and Courtney stepped out into the humid night air. She wore a simple gray sweatshirt and jeans, completely stripped of her designer armor. She walked purposefully onto the brightly lit tarmac. Tariq saw her through the reinforced wire mesh window of the transport van. He slammed his cuffed hands against the glass, screaming her name, desperately begging his wife to help him. Courtney did not even turn her head. She walked right past the van, completely ignoring the frantic, pathetic cries of the man who had actively planned to abandon her to federal prison. She marched directly up to the lead federal agent. She did not cry. She did not plead. She opened a worn canvas tote bag and pulled out a heavy silver laptop. It was Tariq's encrypted master computer, the device he used to conduct all his illicit business and communicate with his underground forger. I brought you the proof, Courtney told the agent, her voice ringing clear and steady over the idling engines. Every forged document, every illegal bank transfer, and every message between him and his mother is on this hard drive. I am turning state's witness. The agent took the laptop, carefully sealing it inside an evidence bag. Tariq watched the entire exchange from the back of the police van, his face pressing against the glass in absolute horror. His own wife had just handed the federal government the final nail for his coffin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty streets of the city. I sat at a small table in the corner of a highly generic downtown coffee shop. The location was deliberately neutral territory, entirely disconnected from my corporate offices or my personal properties. I slowly stirred my black coffee, waiting for the woman who had spent years mocking my traditional values while happily spending my hard-earned money. Exactly on time, the front door of the cafe pushed open. Courtney walked inside, looking over her shoulder with the frantic, exhausted energy of a hunted animal. The transformation in her physical appearance was absolutely staggering. The arrogant luxury retail owner I knew had been completely erased overnight. She wore a faded gray sweatshirt and plain denim jeans. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her face was devoid of the heavy, flawless makeup she usually wore like a suit of armor. She looked utterly stripped of her former designer glamour, reduced to a desperate woman facing the catastrophic consequences of her own boundless greed. She slid into the wooden chair across from me, keeping her hands tucked inside the pockets of her sweatshirt. She did not offer a greeting or an apology for the way she had treated my adopted son. She simply stared at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. She looked like someone who had finally realized she was playing a highly dangerous game against an opponent she could never hope to defeat. I took a sip of my coffee and let the heavy silence stretch between us, forcing her to speak first. Courtney took a shaky breath and leaned forward across the small table. I gave them everything, she whispered, her voice cracking slightly under the immense strain. I handed the lead federal agent Tariq's encrypted master laptop right there on the tarmac. She nervously looked around the quiet coffee shop to ensure no one was listening to our conversation. I unlocked the hard drive for them before I left the airstrip. Every single deleted text message between Tariq and Monica is on that computer. The raw video files from the underground document forger are stored in a hidden folder. I provided the federal investigators with the undeniable digital proof of their entire master plan to forge your medical records and illegally seize your commercial real estate empire. I listened to her frantic confession with a perfectly blank expression. I already knew the federal agents possessed the laptop, but hearing her admit to throwing her own husband under the bus confirmed her absolute lack of loyalty. Courtney folded her hands together on the table, trying desperately to project a false sense of confidence she clearly did not feel. "I gave you the final nail for their coffins, Clifton," she stated, trying to steady her trembling voice. "The federal prosecutors assured me they will grant me full criminal immunity for my total cooperation. I will not go to federal prison for the wire fraud or the conspiracy. But I need something else from you." She looked me directly in the eyes, revealing the true selfish nature of her surrender. "I explicitly demand absolute financial immunity from you and your commercial holding company. You have to use your corporate influence to clear my name from that massive bank deficit. I gave you your revenge, so you have to give me my financial freedom." I leaned back in my wooden chair and studied the desperate woman sitting across from me. She truly believed she was in a position to negotiate terms. She thought her betrayal of Tariq somehow erased her complicity in the severe physical abuse of my adopted son. "You do not understand how this system actually works, Courtney," I told her, my voice low and entirely devoid of compassion. "I accept your total surrender, and I am certainly glad you handed over the digital evidence to secure their criminal convictions. However, I am going to brutally inform you of a very harsh legal reality." Courtney frowned, her false confidence immediately beginning to fracture. "What do you mean?" she asked defensively. "The prosecutors promised me full immunity." I nodded slowly. "Federal criminal immunity only protects you from wearing an orange jumpsuit and sleeping in a concrete cell," I clarified. "It explicitly shields you from the criminal consequences of the federal wire fraud and the medical forgery conspiracy, but it does absolutely nothing to protect you from the civil sector." Her eyes widened as the devastating reality of my words began to sink in. "When Tariq forged my signature to secure the $5 million commercial loan for your luxury retail boutique, he did not just sign his own name," I explained with chilling precision. "He made you a primary co-signer on the commercial lease agreement. You willingly signed those financial documents, eagerly accepting the stolen capital to build your vanity business. The bank officially recalled that massive loan due to fraudulent collateral. You currently owe Vanguard Commercial Banking $5 million. That is a binding civil liability, Courtney. No federal prosecutor on earth has the jurisdictional authority to forgive a legitimate commercial debt. The bank does not care if you turned state's witness against your husband. They only care about balancing their ledgers, and they will pursue you relentlessly until every single penny is recovered." Courtney pressed her hands against her pale cheeks, shaking her head in sheer denial. "No, that is impossible," Courtney gasped, tears of pure panic finally spilling over her eyelashes. "I do not have $5 million. You stripped my accounts to zero. You have to call the bank and fix this. I will not call anyone," I stated with heavy, immovable finality. "You stood by and watched them beat my young son. You are going to spend the absolute rest of your natural life working minimum wage retail jobs. Every single paycheck you ever earn will be aggressively garnished by corporate debt collectors to pay off that massive deficit. You wanted to build a life using my money, and now you will spend your entire life paying it back." I stood up from the table, leaving my coffee untouched. I did not look back as I walked out of the cafe, leaving her completely sobbing and broken. Meanwhile, a storm was brewing across the city. Monica had spent the entire morning frantically calling her elite high society contacts, desperately trying to secure funding for her high-profile divorce petition. Instead, one of her former friends casually informed her of a massive rumor spreading through the legal district. The friend revealed that Courtney was currently cooperating with federal prosecutors and had handed over Tariq's master laptop to secure her own freedom. The news hit Monica like a violent physical blow. Her entire survival strategy relied on maintaining a unified front. Realizing her own daughter-in-law had flipped and handed over the undeniable proof of the medical forgery, Monica completely lost her carefully constructed composure. She immediately commanded her rideshare driver to head straight toward the downtown courthouse. She knew Courtney had a mandatory meeting with the federal prosecutors that afternoon, and she intended to intercept her in the parking lot to exact her brutal revenge. Courtney walked out of the downtown courthouse after meeting with the federal prosecutors, her shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of her inescapable $5 million debt. She stepped into the concrete parking garage, digging into her cheap canvas tote bag for her keys. She did not notice the sleek black town car idling in the shadows. Monica stepped out from behind a concrete pillar blocking Courtney's path between two parked vehicles. The older woman's face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her pristine high society facade had completely burned away, leaving only a desperate, vicious predator. "You ungrateful little traitor," Monica hissed, stepping aggressively into Courtney's personal space. "You handed my son over to the federal government to save your own pathetic skin." Courtney backed up against the side of a parked sedan, raising her hands defensively. "I did what I had to do to survive," Courtney shot back, her voice trembling, but defiant. "Your precious son stole my jewelry and bought a one-way ticket to South America. He was going to leave me to rot in a federal cell." Monica did not care about the logic or the truth of Tariq's cowardice. She only cared that her grand conspiracy was ruined. The argument escalated instantly into violence. Monica lunged forward with a primal scream. She physically attacked Courtney, slapping her viciously across the face with an open palm. Courtney shrieked as Monica grabbed the collar of her faded gray sweatshirt, tearing the fabric violently as she shoved the younger woman hard against the car door. The echoing sound of the slap and Courtney's desperate screams instantly drew the attention of everyone in the parking garage. Attorneys, clerks, and civilians stopped dead in their tracks. We live in an era where public spectacles are immediately immortalized. Within seconds, multiple bystanders pulled out their smartphones, raising the glowing lenses to record the vicious, physical altercation. They captured every humiliating second in high definition. They recorded Monica, a woman who had spent a decade carefully cultivating an image of elegant, unbothered wealth, completely losing her mind in a public parking lot. She clawed at Courtney's hair and screamed obscenities that echoed off the concrete walls. Courtney fought back clumsily, trying to push her furious mother-in-law away, resulting in a chaotic, tangled brawl between two desperate women fighting over the ashes of their stolen empire. The chaos did not last long. Two uniformed court security officers and a local police patrol unit sprinted across the garage. The officers barked loud commands, physically wedging themselves between the two women. They forcefully pulled Monica back, pinning her arms behind her back to stop her from lunging at Courtney again. Courtney slumped against the car, weeping openly as she tried to pull her torn sweatshirt together. The officers did not care about their domestic grievances or their federal investigations. They saw two women committing a violent public disturbance on municipal property. The police separated them, questioning the bystanders and reviewing the immediate smartphone footage. Because neither woman wanted to officially press battery charges that would complicate their ongoing federal nightmares, the officers issued them both severe citations for disorderly conduct and public affray. They were formally escorted off the courthouse property, completely unaware that the worst damage had already been done. Before Monica even reached her cheap rideshare vehicle, the videos of the parking lot brawl had already hit the internet. The footage spread like wildfire across local news blogs and social media platforms. The sheer spectacle of a prominent billionaire's wife engaging in a violent, screaming fistfight with her own daughter-in-law was irresistible clickbait. Gregory and I sat in my secure penthouse suite watching the viral clips circulate on our monitors. I watched Monica's pristine, carefully curated public image shatter into a million irreparable pieces in real time. Her entire identity was tied to her perceived superiority. She had spent the last 10 years strategically climbing the social ladder, hosting extravagant charity galas, and looking down on anyone she deemed beneath her. Now she was the laughingstock of the city. The digital humiliation was instantaneous and absolute. Her wealthy friends, the same women who had eagerly drank her imported champagne and attended her lavish parties, immediately severed all ties. Her phone stopped ringing. Her text messages went entirely unanswered. The elite charity board she had fought so ruthlessly to chair held emergency meetings that very afternoon. They explicitly voted to strip her of her titles and remove her name from their donor walls to avoid any association with the violent, fraudulent scandal. The country clubs canceled her memberships. The high society gatekeepers she worshipped completely excommunicated her, treating her name like a contagious disease. Monica had always believed that money was the ultimate shield against consequence. She failed to realize that the elite circles she so desperately wanted to impress were notoriously fickle. They tolerated arrogance, but they absolutely despised public embarrassment. Stripped of my financial backing, locked out of her secret offshore accounts, and now publicly disgraced by her own violent actions, Monica was finally isolated. She had burned her own bridge to society, leaving herself stranded on a very small, very lonely island with federal prosecutors circling the shores. The explosive fallout of the viral video and Courtney's federal cooperation did not just devastate my immediate family. The shockwaves hit the secondary players who had eagerly participated in their conspiracy. The corrupt doctor who originally signed the fake Alzheimer's diagnosis realized his lucrative medical career was on the verge of total annihilation. He saw the news reports detailing Tariq's arrest and the mounting federal investigation into the forged legal documents. In a sheer blind panic, he attempted to go on the offensive. He desperately wanted to get ahead of the inevitable state medical board review. He hired a sleazy malpractice attorney and immediately filed a frivolous civil lawsuit against me for defamation and tortious interference. He publicly claimed that I was a vindictive, mentally unstable old man trying to ruin his flawless medical reputation just because I disagreed with his professional clinical diagnosis. He thought a loud, aggressive lawsuit would intimidate me into dropping my formal complaints with the state medical board. He believed a billionaire would rather write a quick settlement check than deal with a messy, drawn-out medical dispute in the public eye. He made the exact same fatal miscalculation that Monica and Tariq had made. He assumed I was a target who would simply yield to pressure. He did not realize that I had already secured the ultimate undeniable weapon to completely obliterate his life's work. The state medical board convened in a stark wood-paneled hearing room downtown. I walked through the double doors with Gregory at my side. The corrupt doctor who had signed the fake Alzheimer's diagnosis sat at the defense table. He wore an expensive tailored suit and projected an air of absolute, unbothered confidence. He had filed a frivolous defamation lawsuit against me the previous day, desperately trying to control the narrative before this disciplinary hearing began. He assumed his prestigious medical credentials and his Ivy League degree would easily outweigh the accusations of a commercial real estate developer. He looked at me with a faint, mocking smile, truly believing the board members would protect one of their own against an angry layman. He thought I was just a wealthy businessman lashing out over a medical opinion I did not like. He did not realize I had spent 40 years dismantling men who hid their incompetence behind expensive titles. I took my seat quietly. The board chairman called the disciplinary hearing to order, stating the severe allegations of medical fraud and professional misconduct. The doctor's attorney stood up and immediately delivered a passionate opening statement dismissing my claims as the paranoid delusions of a declining mind. He leaned heavily on the original forged diagnosis, arguing that my presence in the room was actually proof of my instability. I listened to his arrogant defense without blinking. I let them build their paper fortress as high as possible before I brought it crashing down. The chairman called me to the witness stand. I adjusted my suit jacket and walked forward with a steady, measured pace. I took the oath and sat facing the panel of seasoned medical professionals. They looked at me with clinical detachment, searching my posture and my eyes for the cognitive decay the corrupt doctor had so confidently documented. I did not raise my voice or show any anger. I spoke with the exact same lethal clarity I used to close billion-dollar zoning deals. I informed the board that I was fully aware of the fabricated medical narrative presented by the defense. I then turned to Gregory, who approached the bench holding 3 thick, sealed envelopes. He distributed them directly to the board members. I explained that in preparation for this hearing, I had submitted myself to a grueling, comprehensive cognitive examination over the past 48 hours. I did not use local physicians who could be easily swayed by local politics. I flew in 3 independent, world-renowned neurologists from Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic. The envelopes contained their unanimous, certified findings. The board chairman broke the seal on his copy and read the executive summary out loud. The independent specialist concluded that my mental acuity was absolutely flawless, placing my cognitive function in the top 1 percentile for my age bracket. There was zero evidence of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any neurological degradation whatsoever. The smug confidence completely evaporated from the corrupt doctor's face. His attorney frantically objected, claiming the new evaluations were biased, but the sheer pedigree of the neurologists I hired made the objection sound entirely pathetic. I had just scientifically and legally obliterated the foundation of his entire medical career. With my absolute mental competence established beyond any reasonable doubt, it was time to address the actual crime. I looked directly at the corrupt physician. I told the board that a misdiagnosis is a tragic medical error, but a purchased diagnosis is a severe federal crime. The doctor's attorney jumped to his feet, shouting loud objections about slander, but the chairman overruled him instantly. Gregory stepped over to the audiovisual equipment at the center of the hearing room. He connected a secure digital drive and lowered the projection screen. I informed the panel that my biological son, Tariq, had not simply tricked this doctor into signing a false evaluation. He had bought the signature with cold, untraceable cash. Gregory hit the play button. The high-definition security video filled the massive screen. The silent hearing room watched the raw footage from the underground document forger's office. They saw Tariq walk into the frame laughing arrogantly as he dropped thick stacks of $100 bills onto the metal desk. The audio was crystal clear. The board members leaned forward as they heard Tariq explicitly order the fabrication of my dementia diagnosis. More importantly, they heard Tariq name the specific doctor sitting in this very room, detailing exactly how much of the bribe money was earmarked to secure his official medical signature. The undeniable proof of bribery echoed off the wood-paneled walls. The corrupt doctor physically recoiled in his chair. He clutched his chest, gasping for air as he watched his entire life burn to the ground on the projection screen. The undeniable reality of his corruption was laid bare for his esteemed colleagues to witness. He had sold his medical oath to help a greedy son steal an empire, and now there was nowhere left to hide. The video ended, leaving a deafening, heavy silence in its wake. I looked at the board members. Their clinical detachment had been replaced by pure, unfiltered disgust. I stepped down from the witness stand and returned to my seat, leaving the doctor completely defenseless against the wreckage of his own greed. The medical board did not even need to adjourn to private chambers to deliberate. The sheer magnitude of the video evidence and the blatant violation of medical ethics demanded an immediate, brutal response. The chairman struck his gavel and announced the unanimous decision to revoke the doctor's medical license permanently effective that exact second. He also stated that a full transcript of the hearing along with the video evidence was being handed directly over to the state prosecutor's office. The disgraced doctor collapsed over the defense table, weeping openly as the reality of his ruined life crushed him. 2 state police officers entered the hearing room to escort him directly to the precinct for booking on severe criminal bribery and fraud charges. As the officers pulled him to his feet, the doctor looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. He realized he was facing decades in a federal penitentiary for participating in Tariq and Monica's conspiracy. Panic entirely overrode his pride. He frantically turned to the arresting officers and loudly declared that he wanted to make a deal. He promised to testify fully against Monica and Tariq, offering to expose every single detail of their master plan in exchange for a reduced prison sentence. His cowardly surrender was the final domino I needed to push. By breaking the doctor, I had just handed the federal prosecutors the ultimate weapon to use against my treacherous wife and my biological son. The trap was closing tightly around their necks, and the final interrogations were about to begin. The disgraced doctor singing to the federal prosecutors was the absolute final blow to Monica and Tariq's crumbling defense. The walls of the federal courthouse closed in on them with terrifying speed. Federal marshals escorted my wife and my biological son into the maximum security wing of the building, immediately separating them into 2 windowless interrogation rooms. They were completely stripped of their designer clothes, their imported accessories, and their suffocating arrogance. Sitting under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the concrete holding cells, they finally realized the sheer magnitude of their situation. The luxury yachts, the expensive champagne, and the high society galas were permanently gone. In their place stood the crushing reality of federal wire fraud, medical forgery, and severe child endangerment charges. They had spent their entire lives operating as a toxic, unified front, using my wealth to shield themselves from any real consequences. But the federal justice system operates on isolation and psychological pressure. The prosecutors knew exactly how to break a fragile alliance built entirely on greed. By keeping them in separate rooms, the authorities ensured that neither Monica nor Tariq knew what the other was saying. The profound silence of the interrogation rooms amplified their inherent paranoia. They were left completely alone with their own selfish survival instincts, totally unaware that the lead federal prosecutor was about to offer them a masterclass in psychological warfare. The lead prosecutor was a seasoned veteran who specialized in dismantling white-collar criminal conspiracies. He walked into Monica's interrogation room first, carrying a thick manila folder completely stuffed with undeniable digital evidence. He dropped the folder onto the metal table with a heavy, intimidating thud. He did not yell or try to intimidate her physically. He simply laid out the cold, hard facts of her imminent destruction. He showed her the pristine medical evaluation she had purchased, the tracking logs of her fraudulent $50,000 international wire transfer, and the raw security footage of Tariq paying the underground document forger. He informed Monica that Courtney had surrendered the encrypted master laptop and that the corrupt doctor had just agreed to testify for the state. Then he offered her a highly specific, totally ruthless deal. He promised to significantly reduce her recommended prison sentence if she signed a full confession pinning the entire mastermind role directly onto Tariq. The prosecutor did not wait for her answer. He left her sweating in the windowless room and walked straight down the hallway into Tariq's holding cell. He executed the exact same maneuver. He presented my son with the overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence and offered him the exact same lifeline. Tariq could save himself from a maximum security sentence if he provided a sworn recorded deposition proving that his mother had orchestrated the entire financial coup from the very beginning. The prosecutor effectively placed a loaded gun on the table between them, perfectly executing the classic prisoner's dilemma. He knew that two deeply selfish predators would never risk their own freedom to protect each other. I stood in the darkened observation room alongside Gregory, watching the simultaneous interrogations unfold through the two-way glass monitors. I watched the toxic, manipulative mother and son dynamic fracture permanently under the crushing weight of real federal pressure. Monica did not hesitate for more than 5 minutes. The woman who had spent a decade demanding absolute loyalty from everyone around her aggressively threw her own flesh and blood directly under the bus. She leaned into the microphone and painted Tariq as a greedy, unhinged monster. She claimed Tariq had manipulated her into participating in the conservatorship scheme, insisting she was just a terrified, abused wife trying to survive his erratic financial demands. She signed the sworn confession without a single tear for her son. Across the hallway, Tariq proved he was cut from the exact same poisonous cloth. He eagerly accepted the plea deal, frantically talking over the prosecutor to secure his own reduced sentence. He told the federal agents that Monica was the true mastermind behind the entire operation. Tariq claimed his mother had completely orchestrated the medical forgery and forced him to execute the commercial loan fraud to fund her lavish lifestyle. He eagerly provided dates, times, and specific conversations that explicitly implicated his mother in every single federal crime. They simultaneously betrayed each other on camera, completely destroying whatever fragile family bond they claimed to share. I watched the dual depositions in absolute chilling silence. I did not feel any triumph or joy watching my biological son and my wife tear each other apart like cornered rats. I only felt the profound, heavy confirmation that my decision to completely burn my old life to the ground was entirely justified. Their love was always conditional, always transactional, and completely worthless the moment their survival was threatened. The federal trap had closed perfectly, securing their inevitable convictions. I turned away from the monitors and walked out of the courthouse, ready to return to Jaden and begin rebuilding our lives. I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the federal courthouse and breathed in the crisp city air. I felt lighter than I had in a decade. The legal warfare was effectively over. Monica and Tariq were permanently locked in the federal system, actively destroying each other's remaining defenses. But the consequences of Tariq's arrogant, reckless lifestyle were not confined strictly to the courtroom. A new, violently unpredictable threat was actively waiting for me outside the boundaries of the legal system. When Tariq was initially arrested for the physical abuse of my adopted son, he had desperately needed a massive amount of cash to post his temporary bail. Since I had legally frozen his assets and the bank had drained his accounts, he had turned to the criminal underworld. He had borrowed heavily from a highly dangerous local loan shark, a man notorious for using brutal violence to collect his debts. Tariq had abandoned that debt the moment he tried to flee to South America on a private jet. Now the loan shark was looking for his money, and he knew Tariq's father was a billionaire real estate developer. As Gregory and I walked toward the secure parking garage, a dark, unmarked luxury sedan suddenly blocked our path. The doors opened, and two imposing, heavily armed enforcers stepped out onto the concrete. They moved with absolute terrifying purpose, cornering me against the concrete pillars. They were there to collect Tariq's outstanding $500,000 debt, and they fully intended to use physical force to get it. The two imposing enforcers cornered me against the cold concrete pillars of the underground parking garage. The driver was a massive mountain of a man wearing a dark, tailored suit that barely concealed the heavy firearm holstered tightly under his left arm. The second man stepped forward swiftly, effectively blocking my only path to the private elevator leading up to my penthouse. They moved with absolute, terrifying purpose. They were there to collect the $500,000 debt my biological son had recklessly acquired to post his initial bail, and they fully intended to use extreme physical force to get their money. Gregory stood rigidly beside me, clutching his leather briefcase to his chest. his eyes darting nervously toward the security cameras mounted on the concrete ceiling. The lead enforcer did not raise his voice or make sudden movements. He spoke with the quiet, gravelly tone of a man entirely accustomed to immediate obedience. He informed me that Tariq had borrowed $500,000 from his employer, a ruthless local lender who absolutely did not tolerate delayed payments or disappearing clients. Since Tariq was currently sitting in a federal holding cell with his assets entirely frozen by the government, the massive debt automatically transferred to his wealthy billionaire father. The enforcer stepped directly into my personal space, invading my physical boundaries to assert his dominance. He demanded the immediate repayment of the entire sum in untraceable cash, heavily implying that my failure to comply right now would result in severe permanent physical consequences for both me and my adopted son upstairs. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back, and I certainly did not reach into my jacket pocket for my wallet to write them a blank check. Growing up in this city and building a massive commercial real estate empire from the ground up meant dealing with dangerous underground elements long before I ever sat in a comfortable corporate boardroom. I knew exactly how to handle violent men who relied on cheap intimidation tactics. I looked the lead enforcer directly in the eyes, maintaining a cold, completely unyielding posture. I calmly informed him that he had cornered the wrong man tonight. I explained with absolute clarity that I had no legal, moral, or personal obligation to cover a single penny of my biological son's illicit gambling or bail debts. I told the enforcer that Tariq had legally severed his financial ties to my commercial estate months ago when he attempted to forge my signature on a massive corporate loan. The enforcer scoffed loudly, shifting his considerable weight as his right hand drifted dangerously close to his concealed weapon. He told me that street debts do not care about corporate loopholes, federal investigations, or messy family court drama. He insisted that blood dictates liability, and since I clearly had the liquid capital to make the problem disappear, I was going to pay them right now to avoid a bloodbath. I kept my voice perfectly level and calm. I told him that I was a pragmatic businessman who respected a well-documented financial ledger, and I fully understood that his employer simply wanted a timely return on his investment. I assured the armed man that I was not trying to cheat his boss out of the cash. I was simply redirecting his aggressive collection efforts to the specific person who actually held the legal liability for that illicit financial transaction. I turned my head slightly toward Gregory and instructed him to open his briefcase. Gregory carefully unlatched the heavy leather flap, moving incredibly slowly to ensure the armed men did not misinterpret his actions as a threat. He pulled out a thick, certified legal binder and handed it directly to me. I held the binder out to the lead enforcer, ignoring the hostile glare he shot my way. I told him that if his employer was running a highly professional lending operation, he would certainly appreciate flawless financial documentation. The enforcer hesitated for a fraction of a second before snatching the heavy binder from my hands. He opened it under the dim, buzzing fluorescent lights of the parking garage. I walked him through the highlighted pages with the exact precision of a corporate auditor dismantling a fraudulent account. I explained that when Tariq secured the temporary bail funds from their boss, he did not sign the promissory note using his own depleted personal banking accounts. Knowing his assets were actively monitored by aggressive federal prosecutors, Tariq had routed the illicit bail money through a hidden limited liability company to safely wash the funds. I pointed directly to the incorporation documents officially stamped by the state registry. The paperwork clearly proved that the specific shell company Tariq used to secure the massive street debt was solely owned, operated, and funded by Monica. She had created the fake entity years ago to hide her embezzled corporate funds. When I drained her offshore accounts, I deliberately left the shell company intact, specifically for this exact scenario. I told the enforcers that Monica was the sole managing director of the entity holding their employer's $500,000 note. Therefore, she was the only person legally and practically responsible for repaying the money. The enforcer stared at the state-certified documents, his eyes tracking the undeniable proof of Monica's ownership. He realized I was not lying to escape a brutal beating. I was handing him a perfectly packaged, legally binding target. I did not stop at simply handing them the corporate paperwork. I directed the ruthless loan sharks entirely toward Monica's remaining hidden physical assets to ensure they never bothered me again. I pulled a printed inventory manifest from the very back of the legal binder. I informed the dangerous men that while Monica's bank accounts were currently frozen by the federal government, she still possessed a highly valuable collection of imported art luxury vehicles and unregistered diamonds stashed in a private climate-controlled storage facility across town. I handed the lead enforcer the exact address of the secure storage unit along with the master access codes Monica had foolishly used for a decade. The lead enforcer closed the legal binder tightly and tucked it securely under his muscular arm. The aggressive, highly threatening posture completely vanished from his frame, instantly replaced by a cold, predatory focus. He looked at me with a profound sense of grim respect. He clearly recognized that I had just intentionally weaponized his employer's violent collection methods to completely destroy my own treacherous wife. He nodded silently, signaling his armed partner to return to their idling vehicle. The enforcers pivoted their target seamlessly. They got back into their dark luxury sedan and sped out of the underground garage, the heavy tires squealing loudly against the smooth concrete. They were heading straight for Monica. I had successfully ensured that while she sat in a bleak federal holding cell desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal, her entire physical safety net on the outside would be violently dismantled by men who operated far beyond the confines of the courtroom. Her terrifying real-world ruin was now absolutely guaranteed. The federal criminal trial began 3 months later, though calling it a trial felt like a profound overstatement. It was a perfectly executed legal slaughter. Monica and Tariq sat at the defense table looking entirely drained of the arrogant vitality that had defined their existence. The ruthless loan sharks had successfully located Monica's hidden storage facility, stripping her of her luxury vehicles, imported art, and unregistered diamonds before the federal government even knew they existed. She was completely bankrupt, relying on an overworked public defender who looked visibly exhausted by the sheer volume of undeniable evidence stacked against her. The trial concluded with breathtaking speed. The defense strategies completely evaporated the moment the prosecution introduced their star witnesses. The disgraced doctor took the stand weeping openly as he confessed to accepting cash bribes to fabricate my rapid-onset dementia diagnosis. He detailed exactly how Tariq and Monica orchestrated the medical forgery to seize my commercial empire. He was immediately followed by the underground document forger who calmly verified the high-definition security footage showing Tariq purchasing the backdated prenuptial amendment. The final insurmountable blow came when the federal prosecutors projected the encrypted contents of Tariq's own master laptop onto the courtroom monitors. The jury watched in absolute silence as thousands of deleted text messages and financial routing numbers explicitly detailed their 10-year conspiracy. There was absolutely no viable defense left to mount. The mountain of digital and forensic evidence completely crushed any pathetic attempt they made to claim innocence. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my posture perfectly straight, my face an entirely unreadable mask. I did not glare at my biological son or my treacherous wife. I simply watched the inevitable consequences of their boundless greed finally catch up to them. The lead federal prosecutor stepped up to the podium to deliver his closing arguments. He did not merely summarize the forensic evidence. He surgically dismantled the carefully constructed illusion of Monica's high society life and Tariq's inherited entitlement. He painted a devastating, accurate picture of a woman who spent 10 years treating her marriage like a long-term corporate heist. He exposed how Monica manipulated her way into my life, quietly siphoning capital from my commercial construction firm to build an offshore escape fund, all while smiling at charity galas funded by my hard work. The prosecutor then turned his piercing gaze toward Tariq. He stripped away the veneer of the wealthy, sophisticated businessman, exposing my son as a lazy, cowardly predator who lacked the discipline to build his own legacy. He detailed how Tariq recklessly burned through millions of dollars on vanity projects, relying on illegal forgeries and street-level loan sharks to cover his massive failures. He reminded the jury that Tariq was so entirely consumed by his own arrogance that he beat a 15-year-old boy just to protect a fraudulent commercial loan. Sitting in the quiet courtroom, I listened as the prosecutor laid bare the absolute moral bankruptcy of my family. I felt a profound, heavy realization wash over me. The entire decade I spent with Monica was nothing but a calculated hollow con. I had married a parasite, and I had raised a monster. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The sheer magnitude of the digital tracking logs, the flipped witnesses, and the brutal video of the parking lot brawl made their decision effortless. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open, and the 12 jurors filed back into their seats. The atmosphere in the room grew incredibly dense. Monica gripped the edge of the defense table, her knuckles completely white, her breathing shallow and frantic. Tariq stared blankly at the polished wooden floor, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. The federal judge, a stern woman who had zero tolerance for wealthy criminals attempting to manipulate the justice system, instructed the defendants to rise. The court clerk stood and read the verdicts with a clear, ringing authority. Monica was found entirely guilty on all charges, including federal conspiracy, aggravated wire fraud, and multiple counts of criminal forgery. She let out a sharp, pathetic gasp, her knees buckling slightly as the reality of a mandatory minimum prison sentence finally pierced her delusions of grandeur. The clerk then turned to Tariq. My biological son was found completely guilty of federal conspiracy, commercial wire fraud, and criminal forgery. But the clerk did not stop there. The prosecutor had explicitly ensured that the local charges were formally rolled into the federal indictment. Tariq was officially convicted of the severe physical assault and battery of a minor. The clinical medical photographs of Jaden's bruised, battered face had deeply disturbed the jury, ensuring Tariq received the absolute maximum penalty allowed by law. He would not be going to a comfortable minimum security white-collar facility. He was going to a maximum security federal penitentiary. The heavy gavel struck the sounding block, the sharp crack echoing through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. The illusion of their elite, untouchable status was officially dead. They were now simply convicted felons stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their names. Two armed federal bailiffs immediately stepped forward to secure the prisoners. They instructed Monica and Tariq to place their hands behind their backs. Monica wept, openly sobbing into the collar of her cheap gray sweater as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. She did not look at me. She kept her head bowed in absolute crushing shame as she was led toward the holding cells. As the second bailiff grabbed Tariq's arm, my son suddenly snapped his head up. He looked frantically across the courtroom, his wide, terrified eyes locking directly onto mine. The arrogant predator who had threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, desperate coward. "Dad, please." Tariq shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic as the bailiff pulled him toward the heavy side door. "Please, you have to help me. I am your son. You have the money. You can hire the appellate lawyers. You can fix this. I am so sorry. I am begging you, do not let them take me away." He dug his expensive shoes into the courtroom carpet, desperately trying to resist the bailiff's grip, crying out for a father's forgiveness and financial salvation. He truly believed that even after everything he had done, my wealth was still his ultimate safety net. I remained seated in the front row. I did not stand up. I did not offer him a single nod of comfort. I just stared at him with cold, absolute finality. The federal courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. The judge, a stern woman who had zero tolerance for wealthy criminals, looked down from her elevated bench. She asked if any victims wished to read a final statement into the official record before she handed down the mandatory sentences. I stood up from the front row of the gallery. I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored suit and walked slowly toward the wooden podium positioned in the center of the room. I did not carry any notes. I did not need a written script to summarize a decade of betrayal. Every eye in the room was fixed firmly on me. The reporters poised their pens over their notepads. Monica stared at her lap, shivering in her orange jumpsuit. Tariq watched me with wide, terrified eyes, desperately hoping for a last-minute display of paternal mercy. He severely miscalculated my capacity for forgiveness. I grabbed the edges of the podium. I did not yell or raise my voice. I did not let any raw emotion bleed into my words. I spoke with a chilling, absolute finality that immediately commanded total silence from everyone present. I addressed the judge directly, acknowledging the profound gravity of the crimes committed by the two people sitting at the defense table. I told the court that I had spent 40 years building a commercial real estate empire, constructing strong foundations designed to weather any storm. But I had foolishly allowed a deep rot to infect the very foundation of my own home. I turned my body slightly to look directly at my biological son. I told the courtroom about the stark contrast between the two boys I had raised. I explained how Tariq was born into unimaginable wealth and absolute privilege. He was given every single advantage a child could possibly receive. He attended elite private schools, drove luxury vehicles, and walked straight into a high-paying corporate position he did not earn. Yet despite having the entire world handed to him on a silver platter, Tariq developed a malicious, lazy entitlement. He treated my hard-earned capital like an endless personal playground, and he treated the people around him like disposable assets. I then spoke about Jaden. I told the judge about a quiet, brilliant African-American boy I pulled out of the state foster system 5 years ago. Jaden possessed nothing but an enduring resilience and a desperate desire for a safe home. Tariq resented the boy entirely, viewing his mere presence as an insult to his own supreme birthright. The courtroom remained deathly silent as I detailed the exact moment I returned home from my business trip to Chicago early. I described walking down into the dark, damp basement at 3 in the morning. I told them how I found a 15-year-old boy kneeling on the cold concrete floor, desperately scrubbing his own blood out of his bed sheets by hand. I described the swollen purple bruises blooming across Jaden's face and the fresh defensive wounds on his arms. I explicitly detailed how my own wife and my biological son had brutally beaten a child to guarantee his silence before fleeing to the Caribbean to spend my money. The jury and the gallery members gasped in sheer, unfiltered disgust. I looked Tariq dead in the eyes. The panicked, desperate boy staring back at me was a complete stranger. I addressed the court one final time, stating that a true family is defined entirely by loyalty, mutual respect, and unconditional protection. It is never defined solely by shared blood. I looked at Tariq and delivered my final judgment. I only protect my family, I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. You are just a bad investment. I turned my back on him and returned to my seat in the gallery. Tariq completely broke down. He collapsed forward onto the defense table, weeping hysterically, his heavy chains rattling against the wood as he sobbed for a father who no longer recognized his existence. The judge did not display an ounce of pity. She struck her gavel and handed down the sentences. Monica received 25 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated wire fraud, criminal forgery, and massive corporate conspiracy. Tariq received the exact same sentence for the financial crimes, plus an additional 15 consecutive years for the severe physical assault and battery of a minor. The reality of a 40-year maximum security prison sentence crushed Tariq instantly. He wailed as the federal marshals pulled him to his feet. I glanced up toward the back row of the public viewing gallery. Courtney sat completely alone near the exit doors. She had avoided a prison sentence by turning state's witness and handing over the encrypted laptop, but she could not escape the $5 million commercial debt she had willingly co-signed. She was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform from the minimum wage retail job she now worked to pay off her massive civil liability. The arrogant woman who once mocked my working-class roots was now trapped in a permanent cycle of grueling manual labor and endless corporate wage garnishment. She watched her husband being dragged away in shackles, her face pale and entirely devoid of hope. The judge struck her heavy wooden gavel one final time, officially closing the most devastating chapter of my life. The sharp, decisive crack signaled the absolute end of the proceedings. The bailiff swiftly escorted Monica and Tariq through the secure side doors, their orange jumpsuits disappearing into the dark holding corridors of the federal justice system forever. The packed courtroom began to empty slowly, the reporters rushing out to file their breaking stories while the remaining spectators murmured in quiet shock. I did not stay to answer questions from the local press or speak with the prosecuting attorneys. Gregory gave me a silent, respectful nod and stayed behind to handle the final discharge paperwork. I turned and walked alone down the center aisle. I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the expansive marble lobby. I took the elevator down to the ground floor and walked straight out of the main entrance of the courthouse. The bright, blinding sunlight washed over my face, warming the cool morning air. I stood on the wide concrete steps and took a long, deep breath. The suffocating, toxic weight of the past 10 years completely dissolved. The heavy burden of holding my family together, of ignoring the greed, and of fighting a silent war inside my own home finally lifted from my shoulders entirely. The brutal adjustment was over. Tôi vô cùng xin lỗi vì sự nhầm lẫn tai hại vừa rồi. Bạn bực mình là hoàn toàn đúng, tôi đã hiểu sai yêu cầu và tự ý viết lại phần đầu câu chuyện thay vì viết tiếp phần 20 theo đúng dàn ý. Tôi xin bù đắp ngay lập tức bằng việc viết tiếp phần cuối cùng, phần 20 bằng tiếng Anh, nối tiếp chính xác khoảnh khắc Clifton bước ra khỏi tòa án, đảm bảo độ dài văn phòng và tuyệt đối không sử dụng dấu ba chấm. 6 months passed since the heavy wooden doors of the federal courthouse closed behind my former family. The bitter winter gave way to a bright and vibrant spring. I sat on the expansive glass balcony of our modern, highly secure penthouse suite, letting the morning sun warm my face. The city skyline stretched out before us, a sprawling matrix of steel and glass that I had spent 40 years helping to build. But my greatest achievement was sitting directly across the patio table from me. Jaden was completely unrecognizable from the terrified, battered boy I had found scrubbing blood out of his clothes in the dark basement. The purple bruises and defensive wounds had faded completely, leaving no physical scars behind. More importantly, the suffocating shadow of fear that used to dictate his every movement had entirely vanished. He wore a crisp, tailored school uniform, eating breakfast with the relaxed, easy confidence of a young man who finally knew he was absolutely safe. He thrived in his new environment. Without Tariq's constant verbal abuse and Monica's cold disdain, Jaden's natural brilliance flourished. He was leading his advanced mathematics class and had recently joined the debate team, speaking with a sharp analytical clarity that made me incredibly proud. I took a sip of my black coffee watching him review his homework. We had successfully burned the toxic wreckage of our past to ash, and the soil we were planting our new lives in was exceptionally fertile. The quiet peace of the morning was punctuated by the smooth chime of the private elevator. Gregory stepped onto the balcony carrying his familiar leather binder. He did not look like an attorney burdened by endless litigation. He looked like a man who had flawlessly executed a masterstroke. He accepted a cup of coffee and took a seat beside me, placing a crisp legal document on the glass table. I just received the final sentencing confirmation from the federal prosecutor's office. Gregory announced, his voice carrying a note of profound satisfaction. Monica and Tariq have been officially processed into the maximum security federal penitentiary system. All their appeals were aggressively denied. I nodded, feeling no pity, only absolute closure. Gregory leaned forward, tapping the document with his pen. But there is one final beautiful detail regarding Tariq's attempt to seize the estate using that fraudulent commercial loan. When we legally transferred the property out of your personal name and into Vanguard Commercial Holdings, we did not just structure it as a standard corporate entity. We explicitly registered the holding company as a federally protected nonprofit charitable trust designated strictly for the housing and education of foster youth. By forging your signature and leveraging that specific deed as collateral for Courtney's luxury retail boutique, Tariq did not just commit standard wire fraud against a commercial bank. He aggressively defrauded a registered federal charity. I smiled, recognizing the absolute lethality of Gregory's legal architecture. Defrauding a federal charity elevates the crime to a severe aggravated federal offense. It triggers a mandatory enhancement in the sentencing guidelines. It guarantees that Tariq will serve every single day of his 40-year sentence. There is absolutely no possibility of early release or parole. The cage was permanently locked. I thanked Gregory for his impeccable work and watched him head back down the elevator. I turned my attention fully back to Jaden, who had been listening quietly to the exchange. He understood the gravity of what had happened, but he did not dwell on it. I reached down beside my chair and pulled up a heavy rolled set of commercial blueprints. I unrolled the thick blue paper across the glass patio table, weighing the corners down with our coffee mugs. Jaden leaned in, his eyes scanning the complex grid's load, bearing calculations and structural elevations with immediate fascination. This is the new municipal development project Vanguard is breaking ground on next month, I told him, pointing to the central architectural spine of the complex. It requires absolute precision, flawless structural integrity, and a foundation built to withstand any external pressure. I looked directly into his bright, focused eyes. I am going to teach you exactly how to build it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single notarized legal document, placing it gently on top of the blueprints. I had spent 40 years building an empire, and for a decade parasites tried to hollow it out from the inside. They believed wealth was a weapon to intimidate and consume. I wanted to ensure my legacy was placed in hands that understood the value of protection and resilience. Jaden, I said smoothly, this is the finalized corporate succession agreement. I have legally transferred the primary beneficiary status of my entire commercial real estate empire, including Vanguard Holdings, directly to you. You are no longer just my adopted son. You are my sole heir and my absolute partner. Jaden stared at the document, his breath catching in his throat. He did not look at the paper with the greedy, entitled hunger Tariq always possessed. He looked at it with profound, overwhelming gratitude and a deep sense of responsibility. We spent the next 3 hours at that table. I did not just teach him how to read the blueprints. I began teaching him the fundamental philosophy of architectural development. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a brilliant golden light across the endless skyline, I stood up and walked to the edge of the glass balcony. I looked out over the city, breathing in the crisp, clean air. The heavy, suffocating burden of the past 10 years was entirely gone. I thought about the toxic illusion of my former life. I had allowed the biological connection to Tariq and the legal contract with Monica to blind me to their true nature. I had tolerated their arrogance and financed their cruelty because society dictated that blood and marriage demanded unconditional loyalty. But looking back at the table where Jaden was meticulously studying the structural diagrams, measuring angles with absolute focus, I understood the ultimate truth. True family is never defined strictly by blood or pieces of paper. It is defined absolutely by unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and fierce, unconditional protection. The people who share your DNA can be your greatest enemies, while a stranger you choose to pull from the dark can become your greatest legacy. The silent adjustment I initiated on that terrible night in the basement was now fully complete. The parasites had been surgically extracted and permanently locked away. The rotten foundation of my past had been entirely demolished. I placed my hand on Jaden's shoulder as he pointed out a brilliant adjustment to the blueprint. My life was finally my own, and the foundation of my legacy was absolutely secure. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and shared DNA is never an excuse to tolerate abuse. The greatest mistake we make is allowing toxic individuals to use the title of family as a shield for their boundless greed and manipulation. True family is a conscious choice built entirely on mutual respect, unwavering protection, and genuine gratitude. When you finally stop setting yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm, you make room for those who truly value your light. Never fear rebuilding your life from the ground up, because a solid foundation is worth more than a crumbling mansion of lies. If Clifton's journey to protect his true legacy and rebuild his life resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace and your loved ones? Share your own experiences. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice, resilience, and reclaiming your worth.